The bodyguard's hand closed around Lillian's wrist before she could even apologize. "Do you have any idea who you just touched?" She looked up, not at the bodyguard, but at the man behind him. Tall, still, eyes like black ice that had never once melted. The entire sidewalk had gone quiet. People backed away without being told. Cars stopped without being flagged. And Lillian Carter, 26 years old, flour still dusted across her jacket sleeve, stood in the middle of all that silence and did not move. Before we continue, if this is your kind of story, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single episode. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to that rainy night in New York and find out what happens when an ordinary woman walks straight into the most dangerous man in the city. The hand on her wrist tightened. Lillian felt the pressure, not painful, not yet, but deliberate. A message wrapped in muscle. The bodyguard was enormous, wide as a doorframe, and he was looking at her the way people look at something they're about to remove from a floor. "Let go of me," Lillian said. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't performing bravery. She was tired. She had been on her feet for 11 hours. Her left heel had a blister that had popped somewhere around hour 7. She had $43 in her checking account, and rent was due in 9 days. She didn't have the energy left to be afraid of a stranger in an expensive suit. "Lady?" The bodyguard leaned in. "You need to apologize, right now, to him." Lillian looked past the bodyguard's shoulder. The man standing there hadn't moved since the collision. He was still in the exact position she'd crashed into him, one hand at his side, the other slightly raised from instinct, and he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger, not amusement. Something quieter than both. Something that looked almost like surprise, except that men like him, men surrounded by 4 bodyguards outside a hotel that cost more per night than she made in a month, men like that didn't get surprised. "I already apologized," Lillian said, looking directly at the man, not his guard. "I said I didn't see you. That's true. I'm sorry I bumped into you, but I'm not apologizing for existing on a public sidewalk." The bodyguard's grip tightened again, and then a voice said, "Marcus." One word. Quiet as a closing door. The hand released her wrist immediately. The man, the one she'd collided with, the one every person in a 20-foot radius, was pretending not to stare at, stepped forward. He was close enough now that she could see the specific gray of his eyes. Not warm gray, cold gray. The gray of concrete in winter. "You're hurt," he said. Lillian blinked. "What?" He nodded toward her wrist. Marcus had left a mark, a red band of pressure across her skin, already starting to deepen. "I'm fine," she said. "Marcus." The man said again, still looking at her. "You will apologize to her." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before. This one had weight in it. Confusion. Because the 4 bodyguards standing in a semicircle behind their employer were clearly trying to make sense of what they'd just heard. Marcus twice. Lillian's size hands like sledgehammers turned to look at her and said stiffly, like a man reciting something in a language he didn't speak, "I apologize for grabbing you, ma'am." Lillian stared at him. Then she looked back at the man who had issued that instruction. "That wasn't necessary," she said. "It was," he replied simply. "He hurt you first. The collision was an accident." His response was not. She studied him for a moment. The expensive suit. The watch that probably cost more than her father's entire medical debt. The way he stood, not like a man who was used to being obeyed, but like a man who had simply forgotten that disobedience was an option. "Well," she said, pulling her jacket tighter. "Thank you, I guess." She turned to leave. Wait. She stopped. Not because the word carried threat, it didn't. It carried something stranger. It carried what sounded almost like a question. She turned back. "What is your name?" he asked. "Why?" He paused. Like the question genuinely puzzled him. Like people didn't usually ask him why. Because, he said finally, "You are the first person who has spoken to me like that in a very long time. And I find I want to know your name." Lillian looked at him for a long moment. Looked at the guards behind him. Looked at the hotel entrance where two more suited men were standing very still watching this entire exchange with expressions she couldn't interpret. "Lillian," she said. "Lillian Carter." He inclined his head, just slightly. Alexander Moretti. She knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name. You didn't have to follow crime news or read certain newspapers to know Alexander Moretti. You just had to live in this city long enough to hear it mentioned in the same tone of voice people used for weather warnings and avoiding certain streets after dark. She kept her face completely neutral. "Well," she said, "good night, Mr. Moretti." And she walked away. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She kept her pace exactly even shoulders straight until she turned the corner onto 47th Street, and then she pressed herself against the brick wall and let out a breath so long it felt like she'd been holding it since birth. Her hands were shaking. They hadn't shaken while she was looking at him. They were shaking now. She didn't sleep well. That wasn't unusual. Sleep had been difficult for 2 years ever since her father's diagnosis, and it had only gotten worse after the funeral. She lay in her apartment, the one that was 200 square feet of peeling paint, and one window that faced a brick wall, and stared at the ceiling and told herself to stop thinking about gray eyes. She had more pressing things to think about. The bakery had cut her weekend hours. That was $30 less a week. $30 less a week meant she had to choose between the electric bill and the medication copay for Mrs. Nguyen next door, who was 78 and had no family within 3 states, and who Lillian had been quietly helping for 8 months because the woman had once in Lillian's worst week left a bowl of soup outside her door without saying anything. $30 was not nothing. She pulled out the notepad she kept on her nightstand and started recalculating. She could pick up a morning delivery shift. She could sell the textbooks she'd kept from the nursing program she'd dropped out of when her father got sick. She could... Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She didn't answer unknown numbers at 2 in the morning. It buzzed again. She answered. "Here, Ms. Carter." The voice on the other end was professional, crisp, female. "My name is Diane Reeves. I work for Alexander Moretti. Mr. Moretti would like to offer you a position with one of his business holdings, the Meridian, a hotel and event venue on 53rd. He would like you to consider the role of operations coordinator." Lillian sat up. "It's 2 in the morning, she said. A brief pause. "Yes, I apologize for the hour. Mr. Moretti prefers not to delay." "How did you get this number?" Another pause, shorter. "Mr. Moretti prefers not to discuss the mechanics of, how did you get this number? Ms. Carter. The position pays." "I heard you," Lillian said. "I'm asking you how Alexander Moretti got my personal phone number within 2 hours of meeting me on a street corner." The woman named Diane was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted slightly. "He has considerable resources." "That's not an answer." "No," Diane agreed. "It isn't. The salary for the position is $84,000 annually, with full benefits and a transportation allowance. Mr. Moretti asks only that you come for a meeting before declining." $84,000. Lillian looked at her notepad, at the numbers that didn't add up, at the name of her father's hospital still printed on the top of the debt notification letter she'd been using as a bookmark for 3 months. "I'll call back," she said. "During business hours." She hung up. She did not go back to sleep. She told herself she was going to decline. She told herself this on the subway the next morning. She told herself this while mixing the first batch of brioche dough at 5:45 a.m. She told herself this when her coworker Danny asked why she looked like she'd been hit by a car, and she said it was nothing. She was fine, she just hadn't slept. She told herself she was going to decline, and then at 9 a.m., during her break, She called Diane Reeves back. "I have conditions," Lillian said. "Mr. Moretti expected that," Diane said. "He's willing to discuss them." "Not with him. With you first. I want to understand what this job actually is before I walk into a meeting with someone who can make my phone number appear on his desk inside of 90 minutes. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's reasonable. Can you be at the Meridian at noon?" The Meridian was not what Lillian expected. She'd expected something that felt like a front, the kind of establishment that looks legitimate from the outside and feels slightly off once you're inside, where everything is too clean and nobody makes eye contact. She'd expected to feel watched. Instead, she walked into a genuinely beautiful, genuinely busy hotel. The lobby had the organized chaos of a place that actually operated housekeeping carts, moving through efficiently, a line at the front desk. A conference room visible through a glass wall, where someone was setting up for a corporate event, with visible irritation about a projector that wasn't cooperating. Diane Reeves met her at the elevator. 50s, professional, the kind of organized that didn't announce itself. "Before we go up," Lillian said, "I want to ask you something honestly." Diane waited. "Is this place actually what it looks like?" Diane's expression shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, something that might have been respect, or might have been exhaustion, or possibly both. The Meridian has been operating as a legitimate hotel and event venue for 9 years. It has a Michelin-rated restaurant, a full conference facility, and 112 employees. It also has the single most dysfunctional operations system I have ever attempted to manage from a distance, because the last 4 coordinators left within a year each, and Mr. Moretti's solution has been to replace them, rather than examine why they keep leaving. Why do they keep leaving? Because Diane said, the staff is loyal, capable, and fundamentally ungovernable by anyone they don't respect. And they do not respect anyone who treats them like furniture. Lillian considered this. "And Mr. Moretti thinks I would be different because I bumped into him on a sidewalk." "Mr. Moretti thinks you would be different," Diane said carefully, "because when Marcus grabbed your wrist and you were standing in the middle of a street with 4 armed bodyguards around you, you said, and I'm quoting the account I was given, 'I'm not apologizing for existing on a public sidewalk.'" Lillian said nothing. "He found that notable," Diane said. "Marshall." She took the meeting. She had told herself she would decide nothing until she understood more, and the more she understood, the more she found herself in the specific trap of a situation that made logical sense while also feeling completely insane. The Meridian needed an operations coordinator who could manage a staff of 63 people, who had spent years collectively deciding which management decisions they would comply with and which ones they would creatively ignore. The salary was real. The benefits were real. The position had nothing to do, Diane assured her, with any aspect of Alexander Moretti's other holdings. "What other holdings?" Lillian asked. Diane looked at her steadily. "Ms. Carter, I think we both understand that some questions are better left for a different conversation. I need to know what I'm walking into." "You're walking into a hotel," Diane said. "That's what this is. That's what I'm offering you. The man who owns it has a complicated history and a complicated present. What he does not have is any interest in involving his legitimate businesses in his other affairs, because the legitimate businesses are what he uses to keep a certain kind of distance between himself and certain kinds of attention." Lillian understood that. She understood it clearly and without illusion. She also understood that $84,000 was more than twice what she was currently making, and that her father's debt was not going away on its own, and that Mrs. Nguyen's prescriptions cost $240 a month, and that Lillian was so tired, so genuinely exhausted in a way that had been building for 2 years, that the idea of still choosing financial terror out of moral purity felt less noble and more like a different kind of defeat. "I want a 6-month performance review," Lillian said. "In writing, with specific metrics. I want it in my contract that my employment decisions are entirely operational and that I have full authority over staffing and scheduling within the hotel. And I want it in writing that no one, not you, not Mr. Moretti, not any associate of his, can direct me to do anything outside of standard hotel management operations. Diane wrote something on the notepad she was holding. I'll have the contract drafted by end of business, she said. I haven't said yes yet. No, Diane agreed. But you will. Yeah. She started on a Monday. The first thing that happened was that the head of housekeeping, a woman named Gloria, who had been at the Meridian for 7 years and had forearms like a longshoreman, looked Lillian up and down in the way that people do when they're deciding whether to bother being difficult or whether the effort isn't worth it, and said, "You last 6 months, I'll buy you a coffee." "Deal," Lillian said. "And in the meantime, can you walk me through the linen inventory system? Because I looked at the numbers on the way in, and something is off." Gloria's eyes narrowed, not with hostility, with something closer to recalibration. "What do you mean, something is off?" "The order volume doesn't match the usage reports for the last quarter. Either someone is making errors in the logs, or there's a supply issue we need to address, or..." Lillian paused. "Or there's something else I'm missing. I'd rather hear it from you than figure it out wrong." Gloria was quiet for 4 full seconds. "Come with me," she said. It turned out the linen issue was a vendor problem that the previous coordinator had been too intimidated to escalate because the vendor's contract had been personally arranged by one of Mr. Moretti's associates. Gloria explained this with the careful wording of a woman who had learned to say important things in ways that technically could not be quoted later. Lillian thanked her, went back to her office, and called Diane. "The linen vendor contract needs to be reviewed," she said. "The pricing is 17% above market for comparable quality, and the delivery schedule hasn't been honored in 4 months. I need the contract terminated or renegotiated." A pause. "That contract was arranged by..." "I know who arranged it," Lillian said. "My contract says I have full authority over operational decisions within the hotel. Vendor contracts are operational. I need this resolved by end of week." Another pause. Longer. "I'll pass that along," Diane said. By Thursday, the vendor had called with a new pricing structure. Gloria bought Lillian a coffee that Friday, 3 weeks early. She didn't see Alexander Moretti for the first 2 weeks. She was aware of him in the way you're aware of weather, in the way you know a storm is somewhere out there, even when the sky above you is clear. Diane mentioned him occasionally. The staff mentioned him less. What the staff mentioned in the particular way that people mention things they've made their peace with was the understanding that the hotel had a complicated ownership structure and that certain things were to be handled quietly and without questions. Lillian handled them quietly and without questions. She was good at her job. She had always been good at any job she'd done: the bakery, the nursing program before that, the 2 years as a hospital administrative assistant before her father's illness consumed too much of her attention. She had a particular skill for understanding the human infrastructure beneath any system, for seeing not just the org chart, but the real map of who trusted whom and who resented whom and who was quietly doing the work of 3 people without acknowledgement. The Meridian's real map was complex. There was Gloria, who ran housekeeping like a benevolent general, and whose approval was necessary for anything to actually function. There was Paolo, the head chef, who had turned down 2 Michelin stars out of what he described as aesthetic principle, and who was deeply suspicious of anyone who had ever worked in corporate hospitality. There was Marcus, the same. Marcus from the sidewalk, who it turned out was also responsible for hotel security, a fact Lillian had processed with careful neutrality when introduced to him on her first day. Marcus had looked at her with the expression of a man hoping very much that they could simply pretend a particular evening had not occurred. Lillian had offered her hand and said, "Fresh start." He'd shaken it. His grip was careful. She was reorganizing the conference scheduling system on a Thursday afternoon when someone knocked on her open office door. She looked up. Alexander Moretti was standing in her doorway. He was dressed more casually than he'd been that night on the street, still expensive, but without the full armor of the formal suit. He looked in a specific and disorienting way more real. Less like a reputation and more like a person. "Mr. Moretti," she said in the same voice she'd used with the vendor representative and the linen supplier and the difficult florist who had tried to overcharge for the anniversary event last weekend. Professionally neutral, politely impenetrable. "You moved the quarterly conference to the Terrace B room," he said. "I did. The Terrace B room has been used for storage for the past 18 months. "It has," she agreed. "And now it's going to be used for conferences because it has the right dimensions and sight lines for the client's presentation setup, and the room we were going to use doesn't. I had maintenance clear it out Tuesday. Gloria's team has it fully prepared." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her. "You renegotiated the linen contract," he said. "Yes. That vendor had a relationship with—" "I know," she said. "The contract we now have is $11,000 cheaper per quarter and includes enforceable delivery guarantees. If the relationship was more valuable than $11,000 per quarter and actual linens delivered on schedule, I would have appreciated knowing that before I took the position." Diane assured me I had full operational authority. He didn't respond immediately. He came into her office, not in a way that crowded or intimidated, but in the way that people move into spaces they're accustomed to occupying, and stood looking at the wall where she'd put up a whiteboard with the next quarter's event calendar and the various operational threads she was managing. "You did all of this in 2 weeks," he said. "It needed doing." He turned to look at her. The previous coordinators were all experienced hospitality professionals. "I know, Diane showed me their resumes. You have no formal hospitality training." "I know. I also reorganized the supply tracking at a hospital for 2 years and managed a bakery that served 400 people a day on a broken oven and 1 working refrigerator. The specifics change. The principles don't." Something moved across his expression. She couldn't name it precisely. It was in the vicinity of amusement, but quieter than that. "I had a conversation with Diane," he said, "after your first week. She told me you might be the most efficient person she'd encountered in 12 years of managing my businesses. And Diane does not offer assessments like that casually." "Good," Lillian said. "I intend to earn it." He looked at her for another moment. That same quality of attention she'd noticed on the sidewalk, thorough and somehow specific, like he was not looking at her in general, but noticing particular things. "Would you have dinner with me?" he asked. The question landed without fanfare. No preamble, no elaborate setup. Just the question offered simply in the same register as everything else he'd said. "No," she said. He didn't blink. "Why not?" "Because I work for you," she said. "Or technically for your holding company. And because I don't know you. And because I prefer to keep my professional and personal lives separate, especially when one of them involves a man whose last name requires a different kind of awareness than most people's last names require." "That's a careful way to say what you mean." "I'm a careful person." "You weren't particularly careful on the night we met." "I was exhausted," she said. "Tonight I'm neither. So no, Mr. Moretti, not dinner." He was quiet for a moment. "Coffee?" he said. "In the restaurant downstairs, where there will be 60 other people, and you can leave whenever you want." She looked at him. She was aware that this was a bad idea. She was aware that she was sitting in a chair in an office in a building owned by a man who had an entire category of reputation that existed beyond his legitimate businesses, and that the sensible thing was to maintain exactly the professional distance she had just described, and that she had been very clear about this not 30 seconds ago. "1 hour," she said, "in the restaurant, during business hours." "Tomorrow," he said. "Noon." "Noon," she agreed. He turned to leave. At the door he paused. "The Terrace B room," he said. "You were right about it." And then he was gone. She told herself it was reconnaissance. She told herself this the next day, walking into the Meridian's restaurant at 11:58, that she was simply gathering information about her employer context that would help her do her job better, practical and professional, completely reasonable. The restaurant was busy. He was already there at a corner table that was positioned with the specific geometric precision of someone who always sat with his back to a wall and clear sightlines to every entrance. He stood when she approached, which was either old-fashioned courtesy or something performed, and she decided not to assign it meaning either way. "You're early," he said. "I'm on time," she said, sitting down. "You're just earlier." The first 10 minutes were strange. Not uncomfortable exactly, just the particular strangeness of two people who had met under unusual circumstances, now attempting the architecture of a normal conversation. He asked about the hotel. She answered about the hotel. He asked about the upcoming conference. She outlined the operational plan. He listened. He was a very good listener. That was the first thing she noticed. Not that he was waiting for her to stop talking, but that he was actually tracking what she said, asking follow-up questions that indicated he'd heard the previous answer, not questions that indicated he was waiting his turn. "You do this yourself," he said at some point around the 20-minute mark. "Do what?" "Pay attention. Most people don't. They listen for the shape of a conversation. You listen for the content." She looked at him. "You're doing it too." He picked up his coffee. "I learned it out of necessity. In my line of work, missing what someone actually says is dangerous." "In your line of work?" She repeated carefully. "Yes," he said, meeting her eyes without deflection. "In my line of work." They looked at each other across the table. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what your other holdings involve," she said. "I'm not going to perform naivety. I took a job at a legitimate business owned by a complicated man because I needed the work and the work was legitimate. That's a line I drew for myself and I plan to hold it." "I know," he said. "Does that bother you?" He thought about that. Actually thought about it, which she noticed because most people, when asked if something bothered them, answered reflexively one way or the other. "No," he said finally. "It doesn't. It's actually—" He paused. "It's actually easier, knowing exactly where someone stands." "Most people don't tell you." "No," he said. "They pretend until it becomes inconvenient, and then they tell me something else. Or they don't tell me anything, because by then they've already made a decision I didn't know they were considering." She heard something in that. Something that wasn't self-pity. He didn't seem constructed for self-pity, but something adjacent. Something that had the shape of a fact a person had made their peace with. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. "Managing business holdings, being alone," she said, "even when you're surrounded by people." He went very still. Not in a threatening way. In the way that people go still when something unexpected passes through them. "I'm sorry," she said. That was too direct. "No." His voice was different, quieter. "No, it was—" He picked up his coffee again, set it down without drinking. "It was honest. People aren't usually honest with me." I gathered. "Is it that obvious?" "Is which part obvious?" "The alone part." She looked at him across the table. At the expensive watch and the posture that had learned to occupy space as a statement, and the gray eyes that were right now looking at her with something she hadn't expected to find there. "You sat with your back to a wall," she said quietly. "In your own restaurant, in a building full of your own people, and you checked the door twice before the food arrived." He didn't answer. "That's not the behavior of a man who feels safe anywhere," she said. "Even at home." A long silence. "I haven't felt safe anywhere," he said finally, "in a very long time." And there it was. Not a confession designed to make her feel sympathy. Not a performance of vulnerability calculated to lower her defenses. Just a sentence said quietly in a corner restaurant by a man who had clearly not said it to anyone in years. She didn't reach for his hand. She didn't offer consolation. She simply sat with it for a moment, the way you sit with something that is true and heavy and doesn't need decoration. "Well," she said finally, in a tone that was not quite warm and not quite professional, but somewhere that was beginning to sound like what it actually was, honest. "You're not alone right now." He looked at her. For a long moment, the most powerful and most feared man Lillian had ever been in the same room with looked at her across a restaurant table with something on his face that she had seen before in hospital waiting rooms, in the faces of people who had been strong for too long and were sitting down for the first time in years. Relief. Small and guarded, and not quite willing to trust itself. But there. She stayed for 2 hours. She had said 1 hour, and she stayed for 2, and she told herself that the extra time was because the conversation was professionally useful, and that she was building contextual understanding of her employer's perspective, and that none of this had anything to do with the fact that she had not talked to someone like this genuinely, without performance, without either of them managing the conversation toward a predetermined end in longer than she could immediately calculate. She walked back to her office at 2:15. Gloria was in the hallway. "You were in the restaurant," Gloria said. This was not a question. "I had a meeting," Lillian said. Gloria looked at her for a moment with the specific expression of a woman who had been paying close attention to the people in this building for 7 years. "Be careful," she said. "I'm always careful," Lillian said. "No," Gloria said. "You're competent. Those aren't the same thing." Lillian thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. She thought about it while reviewing the Q3 event bookings, and while returning a call from the florist, and while standing in the newly cleared Terrace B room, running through the conference setup in her head. She thought about a man who checked the door twice in his own restaurant, and she thought that Gloria was right. Competent and careful were not the same thing, and she thought, without quite deciding to think it, that she was going to have to be both. That night she went to see Mrs. Nguyen. She brought soup actually made, not canned, which took more time than she had, but Mrs. Nguyen could tell the difference, and Lillian had long ago decided that the things she could give people that cost her something were the things worth giving. She sat in Mrs. Nguyen's kitchen, and Mrs. Nguyen asked about work, and Lillian said it was going well, the new job. She thought she was going to be all right. "You look different," Mrs. Nguyen said. "Different how?" The old woman considered her with the patience of someone who had been watching human beings for 78 years and had stopped being in any hurry to land on the wrong conclusion. "Like something surprised you," Mrs. Nguyen said. "Not bad surprised, just surprised." Lillian thought about gray eyes. She thought about a man sitting with his back to a wall in his own building. She thought about what relief looks like on the face of someone who has forgotten what it felt like to put something down. "Something surprised me," she said, and she left it at that. But walking home through the wet streets, under the yellow light of the lampposts, Lillian Carter had the very clear, very quiet, very inconvenient awareness that she was standing at the edge of something. She couldn't see the bottom. She couldn't see the other side. She only knew that she had looked into the coldest eyes she had ever encountered in her life and seen at the center of all that ice something that was still waiting to be warm. She lasted exactly 4 days before she understood that working for Alexander Moretti was not going to be simple. Not because of him, not directly, but because of the world that moved around him, the invisible current of loyalty and fear and obligation that ran through every room he owned, through every person who worked for him, through every conversation that stopped half a second too quickly when she walked in. She felt it on Monday when one of the junior front desk staff, a young man named Eddie, 23, quick and sharp, the best person on the morning rotation, took a personal call in the back office and came out looking like someone had removed something important from inside him. He smiled when she asked if he was okay. The smile was perfect. His eyes were somewhere else entirely. She felt it on Tuesday when a delivery came to the hotel's service entrance that wasn't on any manifest she'd been given, and when she asked Paulo what it was, he looked at her with the specific patience of a man who had been working in this building long enough to know which questions had answers and which ones had something else. "Produce order," Paulo said. "Different supplier. Don't worry about it." She didn't push. She wrote it down. She felt it most clearly on Wednesday afternoon when a man she had never seen before walked through the hotel lobby with the particular quality of not belonging that people carry when they're used to belonging everywhere and have temporarily decided not to. He wasn't staff. He wasn't a guest. He moved through the space like he was taking inventory of it, and when his eyes landed on her where she stood near the concierge desk, they stayed there for 3 seconds too long before he turned and walked back out the main entrance. She went to find Marcus. Marcus was in the security office on the second floor reviewing camera footage with the focused discomfort of a man who spent his working life managing the overlap between two different categories of threat. "The man who just walked through the lobby," she said. "Who was he?" Marcus looked at the monitor, back at her. "Someone you don't need to worry about." "Marcus?" She sat down across from him without being invited. "I've been here 3 weeks. I've reorganized 4 vendor contracts, restructured the conference calendar, identified a payroll discrepancy that was costing this hotel $900 a month, and not once have I asked you a question I didn't need the answer to. So when I ask you who was just walking through my hotel looking at me like he was memorizing my face, I need the answer to that." A long pause. "He works for Vincent Caruso," Marcus said. She kept her face very still. "And Vincent Caruso is someone who Mr. Moretti has a complicated history with." "Is he a threat to the hotel?" "To the hotel?" Marcus said carefully. "No. To Mr. Moretti." "That's not your department, Ms. Carter. If someone connected to a threat to Mr. Moretti is walking through this building taking stock of it," she said, "then yes, Marcus, it is my department, because this hotel's operations don't exist in a vacuum. If something happens here, it happens to my staff. It happens to Gloria and Paulo and Eddie and the 60 other people who clock in every morning assuming they're going to a job, not a situation." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "I'll let Mr. Moretti know you asked," he said. "You do that," she said, and she went back to her office and sat very still for approximately 90 seconds, and then she called Diane. "I need to understand something," she said when Diane picked up. "Ms. Carter." "Diane, I have a man from Vincent Caruso's organization walking through my hotel, and I have a junior staff member who got a phone call this morning that turned him gray. I need to know if there's something happening that I should be aware of as the person responsible for the operational safety of 63 employees." Silence on the other end. "Hold on," Diane said. She was on hold for 4 minutes. When Diane came back, her voice was measured in the way that voices are when someone is choosing each word individually. "There's some tension," Diane said, "between Mr. Moretti and Mr. Caruso that predates your time here. Mr. Moretti is handling it. The hotel is not involved. A man from Caruso's organization just walked through my lobby. I know, Mr. Moretti is aware. That's not the same as it not being my problem. Ms. Carter." A pause. "I think it would be helpful if you spoke with Mr. Moretti directly." He called her 6 minutes later. "You spoke to Marcus," he said. "And Diane, yes. You're not in any danger." "I didn't say I was worried about me," she said. "I said I was worried about my staff." A silence. Not an uncomfortable one more, the kind of silence that happens when someone recalibrates. "The situation with Caruso is not going to touch the hotel," he said. "I keep things separated. That's not an accident." "Someone forgot to keep it separated this afternoon." Another silence. Longer. "That won't happen again," he said. "I need more than that." "What do you need?" "I need to know," she said. "If there is ever a specific and credible threat to the safety of anyone in this building, you will tell me. Not after the fact. Before, so I can make operational decisions accordingly. That's what I'm asking." He was quiet for so long she thought the call might have dropped. "Yes," he said finally. "I can do that." "Thank you," she said. And she hung up. She sat in the quiet of her office for a moment. Then she pulled up the conference schedule and went back to work. Because the quarterly event was in 12 days, and the Terrace BAV system still had 3 components that needed testing, and she was not going to let the existential complications of her employment situation affect the event coordination timeline. But her hands very briefly were not quite steady. She recognized that. She recognized the specific physical fact of being frightened and choosing not to perform it. She'd had a lot of practice in the last 2 years. You learn to do the work anyway. You learn that the work is sometimes what keeps you from falling into whatever is waiting at the edge of your composure. She tested the AV system herself the following morning. It worked perfectly. She told herself that meant something. She wasn't entirely sure it did. 1. Alexander came to the hotel the next Thursday. Not to see her, or at least that was not the stated reason. He had a meeting with his accountants in the third-floor conference room, which was legitimate and scheduled, and had nothing to do with her, and she was aware of his presence in the building, the way she'd been aware of weather patterns since that first week as background information she kept note of without letting it redirect her. He appeared in her office doorway at 4:47 after the accountants had left. "The quarterly numbers look good," he said. "They will look better next quarter," she said, without looking up from the scheduling software. "The vendor savings alone should push the margin by about 3%. Diane says you've requested a full audit of the maintenance contracts. The elevator service contract hasn't been renegotiated in 6 years, and we're paying 40% above what comparable buildings in this zip code pay. The HVAC contract has an automatic renewal clause that nobody has ever challenged. I intend to challenge it." She finally looked up. He was leaning against her door frame with his arms crossed, watching her with that quality of attention she still hadn't quite gotten comfortable with, and he was doing something that was almost smiling. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Someone I used to know a long time ago, before—" He stopped, recalibrated. "Never mind, it's not relevant." "Everything's relevant," she said. "That's kind of my operating principle." He came into the office and sat in the chair across from her desk, which he did without asking, and which she had stopped finding presumptuous approximately 10 days ago, because it had become without any formal agreement simply something he did when he came to her office. He sat in the chair. She kept working or stopped working depending on the urgency of whatever was in front of her. They talked. It had become, she realized, with a discomfort, she was actively managing a thing. "The person you used to know," she said, returning to it because she had decided early in her life that the things people half said were usually the things most worth finishing. "Who were they?" He was quiet for a moment. "My mother," he said. "She ran a dry cleaning business on Canal Street for 22 years. She knew every vendor's name, every customer's preference, exactly how many minutes each machine ran before it needed to be serviced. She used to say—" He paused. The pause had something in it she hadn't heard in his voice before, something unarmored. She used to say that the secret to running anything was caring more about the details than anyone else thought the details were worth caring about. Lillian put her pen down. "She sounds like she was remarkable," she said. She was. He looked at the wall behind Lillian's head. She died before any of this. Before a gesture that was small and comprehensive and encompassed everything that was complicated about who he was. She would have had opinions about my choices. Strong ones, probably. Very. Something moved across his face. Not grief exactly. More like grief that had been handled so many times it had worn smooth, still present, but no longer sharp-edged. She used to tell me that the only power worth having was the kind that made people's lives easier. Not better for you, for them. "Do you think you've done that?" Lillian asked. He looked at her. "No," he said simply. "Not enough." She held his gaze. The directness of his answer, the absence of justification or self-defense, landed with a weight that she hadn't been prepared for. "Honesty," she said, "seems to be something you can do when you want to." "It's easier," he said, "with people who won't use it against you. And you think I won't. I think," he said carefully, "that you are the most genuinely disinterested person I have come across in about 15 years. You don't want something from me. You don't want my protection or my connections or to be adjacent to something powerful. You want your vendor contracts renegotiated and your staff treated fairly." A pause. "It's extremely unusual." "You work with the wrong people," she said. "I know," he said. "Most of my life has been built on working with the wrong people because they were the only ones available." She thought about that for a moment. About what it looked like to build an entire architecture of your life out of necessity rather than choice, and then to become so embedded in that architecture that the walls were load-bearing, that you couldn't take them down without taking the whole structure with them. Your mother's principle, she said. Power that makes people's lives easier. You still believe that somewhere. He looked at her. How do you know? Because you told a 250-pound bodyguard to apologize to a woman he grabbed on a public sidewalk, she said. You didn't have to do that. It wasn't strategic. It just was the right thing. He was silent. There's a person in there, she said not unkindly, who still knows what the right thing is. The silence that followed was of the very particular variety that happens when something true lands in a room without anywhere to go, and everyone present just has to wait for it to settle. Don't idealize me, he said finally, and his voice was rough with something that was not quite warning and not quite plea. I'm not, she said. I'm just telling you what I see. He stood up from the chair, straightened his jacket, moved toward the door with the deliberate quality of a man who had decided the conversation needed to end before it went somewhere he hadn't planned for. At the door he stopped. Dinner, he said. Not here. Somewhere I don't own. Somewhere that is not about the hotel, or the vendor contracts or anything operational. She looked at him. Why? She said. Because, he said, I haven't had a conversation like that in... He stopped. A long time, and I'd like another one. She should have said no. She had drawn a line. She had been very clear about the line. The line was important for a variety of professional and personal and practical reasons that had not stopped being true just because someone had said something honest about his dead mother. Saturday, she said. 7 o'clock. I picked the restaurant. Something shifted on his face. Not a full smile more, the precursor to one, the movement that happens in a face that has forgotten how smiling works, but is beginning to remember the mechanism. Saturday, he said. 7 o'clock. She picked a Thai place in Midtown that cost $38 per person and had paper placemats and had been there since 1987 and was so aggressively ordinary that not a single person in the room was going to look twice at either of them, no matter how expensive his watch was. He arrived exactly on time. He looked at the restaurant, at the paper placemats and the laminated menus, and the photograph of the King of Thailand that had been on the wall since the Carter administration. You did this on purpose, he said. I did, she agreed. Sit down. He sat down. He picked up the laminated menu and studied it with the specific expression of a man who had not read a laminated menu in some years and was finding the experience unexpectedly grounding. What's good? He asked. Everything. Order the pad CU and the green curry and stop trying to control your face. I'm not. You're deciding whether to be uncomfortable, she said. Stop. Just eat the food. He set the menu down, looked at her. You talk to me like... Like what? Like you're not afraid of me. I'm not afraid of you. Everyone is afraid of me. That sounds exhausting, she said. He stared at her for a long moment. And then, for the first time since she had met him, not a precursor to a smile, not the ghost of one, but an actual, real, unguarded expression that had nothing calculated about it. He laughed. It was a short sound. Surprised out of him. Like a reflex his body had executed before his defenses had a chance to stop it. He stopped almost immediately, looked almost embarrassed. Don't, she said. Don't what? Take it back. You don't have to. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't do that, he said. Usually. Laugh. Show anything. She studied him. That sounds even more exhausting than people being afraid of you. He looked down at the placemat. You learn to stop noticing after a while. Is that what happened? You stopped noticing. I stopped being the kind of person things happen to, he said slowly, like he was finding the words as he went. I became the kind of person who made things happen. That seemed better, safer. You don't get surprised by what you control. Except you still got surprised, she said. On the sidewalk. Yes, he said. By a woman who wouldn't apologize for existing. She held his gaze. For what it's worth, I was terrified, just after I turned the corner. He blinked. You didn't show it. I know. But I want you to know it wasn't bravery. It was stubbornness. And maybe being too tired to perform fear at full capacity. Something shifted in his expression. Something that was not quite the laugh again, but was in the same neighborhood and openness that arrived and stayed this time, instead of retreating. Why are you telling me that? He asked. Because I don't want you to think I'm something I'm not, she said. You said everyone shows you what they want you to see. I'm not going to do that. I'm just whoever I actually am, which includes being afraid sometimes and stubborn sometimes and occasionally very wrong about things. He was quiet for a moment. What are you wrong about? Currently. Yes, she tilted her head. I thought the Terrace B projector issue was a mounting problem. It was actually a firmware update. Cost me 45 minutes I didn't have on Tuesday. He stared at her. I meant about something important. That was important, she said. I had a presentation at 3. He shook his head slowly, not with frustration, with something closer to bewilderment. You are not like anyone I have ever met. Good, she said. Now order your food. The pad see ew is better when it's fresh. They ate. They talked. Not about the hotel. Not about Caruso or whatever tension was gathering in the invisible edges of his world. They talked about his mother's dry cleaning business and the way he used to sort buttons into jars as a child because it was the only job she'd trust him with until he was 8. They talked about Lillian's father, his particular stubborn cheerfulness in the hospital, the way he would ask the nurses about their families and memorize the answers and ask follow-up questions at the next visit, like he had been assigned to care about them. He sounds like a good man, Alexander said. He was the best man I've ever known, Lillian said. And I've spent the last 2 years trying to figure out how to be in the world without the specific gravity of him in it. The silence that followed was comfortable in the particular way of silences between people who have said something real and are both sitting with it. My father was not a good man, Alexander said. He was effective, efficient. He built something and he passed it on and he expected it to be maintained. But good. He shook his head. Good was not a category he found relevant. Do you find it relevant? He picked up his glass, set it down without drinking. I find myself finding it relevant more recently, he said. Yes. She looked at him across the table in a Thai restaurant on a Saturday night in Midtown, with paper placemats and the King of Thailand on the wall, and she thought about what Gloria had said. Competent and careful are not the same thing. She thought about what she was doing here. She thought about the specific danger of feeling sorry for powerful men, which was a trap she had been warned about and recognized intellectually. And was she admitted only to herself, in this moment, not entirely successfully avoiding? But she also thought about the difference between feeling sorry for someone and simply seeing them clearly. Between pity and recognition. And what she felt sitting across from him was not pity. It was the very uncomfortable awareness that she was beginning to know someone. He walked her home. She hadn't asked him to. He simply stood up when she stood up, and when she said she was taking the subway, he said he would walk her to the station, and she had decided not to argue because her feet hurt, and the argument wasn't worth the energy. They walked 4 blocks in the mild October air without talking, which should have been awkward and wasn't. The thing with Caruso, she said, because she had been thinking about it since Wednesday, and the thinking hadn't resolved anything. How serious is it? He glanced at her. Serious enough. Are you going to handle it the usual way? A long pause. What do you think the usual way is? I think, she said carefully, that there are approximately 4 ways to handle conflict in your world, and that at least 2 of them involve things I'd rather not know about. What I'm asking is whether this is going to escalate, and whether that escalation is going to come anywhere near my hotel or my staff. My hotel, he said. Not correcting her, she caught the tone. More like he was noting the word she'd used with something close to appreciation. Your hotel, she amended. My responsibility. It won't touch the hotel, he said. I promise you that. Okay, she said. They reached the subway entrance. She stopped on the steps. He stopped beside her. Why do you trust me on that? He asked. She thought about it genuinely. I don't know if trust is the right word. I think I believe that you mean it. Whether you can deliver it is a different question. And you're okay with that uncertainty. I'm not okay with it, she said. But I'm operating inside it. There's a difference. He looked at her in the specific way she was becoming familiar with thoroughly, like he was committing something to memory. Saturday was... He stopped, seemed to reconsider the word he'd been about to use. Thank you, he said. For the restaurant, and the conversation. Don't thank me, she said. I had you. I had an agenda. That almost smile again. Stronger this time, closer to the real thing. Lillian, he said. She stopped. I need you to know something, he said. His voice was different. The professional register was gone. The careful neutrality was gone. What was left was simply a voice. A person's voice. I'm not good at this. Whatever this is, I'm not good at it. I haven't been good at it since before you were working for me, or before the sidewalk, or... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture that was completely unguarded and made him look for one moment like someone without the weight of everything he carried. I just need you to know that whatever I do or don't do well in the next, I don't know how long it's not because I'm not trying. She looked at him. She thought about all the reasonable things she could say, all the sensible framings, the professional distance, the careful management of an impractical situation. I know, she said instead. Simply. He exhaled, just slightly, like something had loosened. Good night, Lillian. Good night, Alexander. She went down the subway stairs without looking back. She held it together through the entire ride, held the composure and the practicality and the careful understanding that she was a woman who made sensible decisions and did not let inconvenient feelings redirect her. And then she got off at her stop, walked half a block to her building, sat down on the stoop in the cold October air, and pressed her hands flat against her knees and breathed. This was not sensible. She knew that. She knew the precise shape and weight of the thing that was building between them, the way you know weather before it arrives in your bones, before your eyes can confirm it. She knew it was not sensible. She also knew, sitting there on the cold stoop in the dark, that sensible had been the entire architecture of her life for 2 years, and that it had kept her standing, and it had kept her functional, and it had not once made her feel like that conversation had made her feel seen. That was the word. She had not felt that in a long time. She went inside. She did not call Gloria. She did not make any decisions. She did not resolve anything. She went to bed, and for the first time in longer than she could count, she fell asleep within 20 minutes. Eddie quit on Monday. She found out from the front desk supervisor, a quiet man named James, who delivered information with the same economy he used for everything. Eddie called out, "Personal situation." She knew immediately. She called Eddie directly. He picked up after 4 rings, and the silence before he spoke told her everything the words confirmed. "Ms. Carter, I'm sorry. I should have given notice. It's complicated and I need to not be there right now." "Eddie?" She kept her voice even. "Is someone pressuring you to leave?" A pause. Too long to be innocent. "I can't talk about it," he said. "Are you safe?" "Yes." The answer came quickly. "Yes, I'm fine. It's just there are people who wanted information about the hotel, about certain things. And I said no, and I'm going to keep saying no, but it's easier to say no if I'm not there, you know. It's easier if I'm not." "Eddie, stop." She closed her office door. "Which people?" Silence. "Caruso," she said. Not a question. She heard his breathing change. "I can't." "You don't have to confirm it," she said. "I understand. Eddie, I need you to listen to me. You did exactly the right thing, and I need you to know that your safety is more important than any job, including this one. If you need to stay away, stay away. But I want you to know that when this is resolved, there will be a job here for you. Ms. Carter. I'm going to handle this, she said. She hung up, sat for 3 seconds, picked up her phone and called Alexander. He answered on the second ring. Caruso's people approached one of my staff, she said. Eddie Malone, front desk. They were asking for information about the hotel. He refused and felt he had to quit to stay safe. Silence on the other end. Not the kind of silence that meant he didn't know. The kind that meant he was making very quick calculations about several things simultaneously. When, he said. The call came last Monday, the one that turned him gray. I saw it happen, and I noted it, and I should have pushed harder that day and I didn't, and that's on me. But this is on you too. She did not modulate her voice. You told me it wouldn't touch my staff. I know, he said. His voice was very quiet. Alexander? I know, he said again, and this time there was something in it that she recognized as something she had not heard from him before. Not anger, not calculation, something closer to shame. Fix it, she said, and not with the usual methods. Fix it so that a 23-year-old kid can go back to a job he was good at without being afraid. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I'll handle it, he said. I know you will, she said. I just need you to understand what's at stake. It's not the hotel, it's the people in it, and they matter more. She hung up. She sat in her office for a moment. She was shaking again, hands barely. The specific tremor of someone who has said a true and necessary thing to a person whose response they cannot control. She pressed her palms flat on the desk and breathed, and she thought about her father saying that the only thing you could do with any person in any situation was tell the truth, and then stand behind it. You couldn't control what came after. You just had to know you'd been honest. She pulled up the conference prep checklist and got back to work. Eddie was back on Thursday. He walked in at 7:50 for his 8 o'clock shift, and he stood at the front desk and looked at her when she came through the lobby, and she could see that whatever had happened between Monday and Thursday, whatever Alexander had done or said or arranged it, had been effective. The gray was gone. He looked tired, but unfrightened. Ms. Carter, he said. Eddie? She kept walking. Welcome back. The morning check-in queue is going to be heavy today. We have a conference group arriving. On it, he said. She didn't look back, but she carried that small thing with her through the rest of the morning, the specific lightness of something having worked out, of power having been used the right way, for once. For once in this situation for this person, the right thing had happened, and she thought about Alexander and what it had cost him to make it happen that way instead of the other way. She called him at noon. Eddie's back, she said when he picked up. I know, he said. Thank you. A pause. You don't need to thank me. I know I don't need to, she said. I wanted to. Another pause. Longer. Lillian, he said. Yes. I'd like another Saturday, he said. You picked the restaurant again. She smiled, which surprised her slightly, the way the reflex arrived before the thought. I know a place, she said. They've been making the same soup since 1973. That sounds... He paused, and she could hear him reaching for the word. That sounds good, he said. And it was, she thought. It was. But somewhere beyond the restaurant and the soup and the conversations that were becoming the best part of her weeks, something was moving. She could feel it the way you feel pressure before a storm. Something in the world that Alexander lived in was not standing still, was not content, was not going to leave this quiet growing thing alone. She just didn't know yet what shape it would take when it arrived. The soup restaurant on Thursday nights became their ritual, not by agreement. They never formally agreed to anything, which Lillian had come to understand was how Alexander operated in the parts of his life that mattered to him. The things he cared about, he didn't announce. He just showed up. Consistently. Without negotiation or calendar invitations or the kind of deliberate planning that would require him to admit what he was doing. He showed up at 7:03 every Thursday. She was always there first. She always ordered the same soup, the one that had been made the same way since 1973, by a man named Henry, who was 71 and had the hands of someone who had been cooking since before either of them were born. Alexander had started ordering it too the third week without comment. Henry had noticed. Henry noticed everything. He was the kind of restaurant owner who cataloged his regulars with the precision of someone who understood that people revealed themselves most clearly in what they ordered and how often they came back. The fourth Thursday, Henry brought the soup without being asked. Alexander looked up at him. "You two are easy," Henry said simply and went back to the kitchen. Lillian watched Alexander process this, the small, ordinary domestic fact of being known in a restaurant, of being predictable in a context that had nothing to do with power or threat or strategy. She watched him decide deliberately to let it land without deflecting it. "When did you find this place?" he asked. "My father used to bring me here," she said. "When I was small, maybe 8 or 9. He said it was the only restaurant in the city that tasted like someone actually cared what they were cooking." Alexander looked down at his soup. He was right. He usually was, she said. About the things that didn't involve his own health, which he was catastrophically wrong about until it was too late. Stubborn. Constitutionally opposed to doctors. He thought vulnerability was something you only admitted in private. She paused. He got better about it later, when he didn't have a choice. "Does it help?" Alexander asked. "Talking about him." She considered the question honestly. Yes and no. It helps to say his name in sentences that aren't about the debt or the funeral. It helps to remember who he was instead of just what he cost. She met Alexander's eyes. "Does that sound terrible?" "No," he said immediately. "It sounds true." She held his gaze. "You're very good at recognizing true things." "I've spent a long time surrounded by false ones," he said. "You develop an ear for the difference." They ate in companionable quiet for a moment, and Lillian was aware, as she was becoming increasingly aware in these Thursday evenings, of how much was not being said alongside everything that was. The parallel conversation. The one happening in the silences, and the way he positioned himself at the table, now only slightly angled toward the door instead of fully, and the way she had stopped reminding herself to maintain professional distance, because the professional distance had quietly become something else without anyone issuing a formal announcement. "Vincent Caruso came to see me," Alexander said. She set down her spoon. "When?" "Tuesday. He came to my office." His voice was even, informational. Not a hostile visit. He wanted to renegotiate the terms of a long-standing disagreement. He made an offer. "What kind of offer?" "The kind that requires me to do something I don't want to do in exchange for something he claims I need." "What does he claim you need?" Alexander looked at her. "Safety. For my holdings. For my people." A pause. He was very specific about which people he considered worth mentioning. Something cold moved through her. He mentioned me. Not by name, but specifically enough. She was quiet for a moment, processing. He was making a threat. He was making an observation. In his world, those are the same thing. "What did you say?" "I told him I'd consider his offer." He picked up his spoon again, set it down. "I'm not going to accept it. But I needed him to believe I might while I work out what he actually wants, because what he said he wants and what he actually wants are never the same thing with Caruso." "Alexander." She said his name carefully. "If he's using me as leverage, he's using you as information," he said. "He's telling me he knows about you, because knowing that I know that he knows is supposed to change how I move. It's a pressure tactic. It's not a plan of action yet." "Yet?" she said. He met her eyes. "Yet." She looked at him across the table. At the soup getting cold between them, and the restaurant filling up around them with ordinary people having ordinary evenings, and she thought about what it meant to be a piece of information in someone else's negotiation. To be a leverage point. To be a name that got dropped in a room she wasn't in, doing work she hadn't consented to. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not frightened," she said. "I know, but I'm also not going to let him use that," she said. "If Caruso thinks that mentioning me is going to make you make a bad decision, then the way you counter that is by making sure that mentioning me doesn't work." He stared at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that fear is only leverage if you act on it," she said. "So don't act on it. Handle Caruso the right way, the way that actually resolves the problem rather than the way that's fastest. And trust that I can take care of myself until you do." "Lillian." "I'm not naive," she said. "I know what taking care of myself means in this context has limits. I know there are things I can't handle alone, but I'm not going to be the reason you make a decision you'll regret. I won't do that." He was looking at her with that expression she still couldn't fully name, the one that had arrived the first evening she'd told him he wasn't alone right now and hadn't entirely left since. "Most people," he said quietly, "when they find out they're in the middle of something like this, run." "I'm not most people," she said. "No," he agreed. "You are genuinely not." Henry came to refill the water, looked at the untouched soup, looked at both of them, and said nothing. Just refilled the glasses and left. They finished dinner. They walked. This had become part of it too, the walk after through whatever the October air had to offer down streets that had nothing to do with either of them professionally, and everything to do with the strange growing fact of them personally. "I need to tell you something," Alexander said. They were 3 blocks from the subway. "And I need you to hear it as information, not as—" He stopped. "Not as something I'm asking you to respond to right now." She waited. "I haven't cared about anyone," he said, slowly finding each word individually, "in a very long time. I stopped letting myself. It was a tactical decision that became a habit that became just what I was. And I had made my peace with that. I had decided it was the right way to operate because caring about people in my world is a liability, and I had cataloged everyone I'd ever cared about and what it had cost them, and I had decided it wasn't worth doing to anyone else." She kept walking, kept her face neutral, let him finish. "And then you bumped into me on a wet sidewalk," he said. "And you looked at me like I was just a person, and I have spent every week since then trying to remember that this is a bad idea and failing to actually believe it." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very long way of saying something short," she said. "Yes?" he agreed. "It is." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. She turned to look at him. At his face in the lamplight, which she had catalogued by now, the specific set of his jaw, and the way the gray of his eyes shifted depending on what he was carrying, and the small scar along his left jaw that she had never asked about and probably wouldn't. "I know," she said. "Me too." His exhale was almost inaudible. "That doesn't solve the Caruso problem," she said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. And it doesn't solve the problem of you being who you are and me being who I am, and those two things requiring a very complicated navigation." "No," he said. "It doesn't solve that either." "But," she said, and paused, and decided to finish the sentence honestly. "It's true. So." They stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, in the specific stillness of two people who have just admitted something real and are both processing what comes next. Then she said, "Walk me to the subway." He did. She went down the stairs. He stood at the top. She did not look back this time either, but she was smiling, which she felt in her face before she was aware of deciding to do it. A small, involuntary, honest expression that she allowed herself in the fluorescent light of the subway platform, where nobody was watching and nothing required her to manage it. She carried it home like something fragile and warm. 3 days later, the fragile, warm thing shattered. She was in the hotel at 8:15 on a Sunday morning, running through the setup for a corporate brunch that was starting at 10 when Marcus appeared in the doorway of the event space. His expression was the specific kind that meant something had moved past the category of warning and into the category of happening. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I need you to come with me." "I'm in the middle of—" "Now," he said, "please." The please was what made her move. She followed him to the security office. Inside there were two men she had never seen before, both in suits, both with the particular quality of stillness that Marcus also had, the trained kind. And sitting at the small table was a woman Lillian had also never seen before, mid-40s, dressed like she'd come from somewhere important, holding a phone that she turned face up on the table when Lillian walked in. On the screen was a photograph of her, taken from a distance on a street she recognized as being 2 blocks from her apartment. The timestamp was Friday, 2 days ago. She had walked that route at exactly that time. She was alone in the photo, carrying the bag she used for grocery shopping, completely unaware. "Who took this?" Lillian said. "Caruso's people," Marcus said. "We picked it up from a monitored source this morning." "Why?" She was very still. "What does he want with a photo of me grocery shopping?" The woman at the table said, "Ms. Carter, my name is Sandra Lane. I work for Mr. Moretti in a capacity I won't specify. I need to ask you some questions about your routine. Where you go. When. Whether you vary it or follow patterns." "Patterns," Lillian said. "He's been watching my patterns." "We believe so," Sandra said. "Since approximately Tuesday of this week." 3 days. Since Alexander had told her about Caruso's visit. Since Caruso had made his offer and Alexander had said he'd consider it. Caruso hadn't believed him. Or Caruso had believed him and was establishing contingencies anyway. "Where is Alexander?" she said. "Mr. Moretti is handling the situation," Marcus said. "I didn't ask if he was handling it. I asked where he was." "Ms. Carter." "Marcus." She turned to look at him directly. "Either you tell me where he is and what's happening, or I walk out of this hotel right now and I go home to my apartment, which apparently Caruso's people have been photographing, and I resume my very documented routine." Marcus and Sandra exchanged a look. "He went to see Caruso this morning," Marcus said. "He left at 7. He went without full security because he didn't want it to look like a hostile move. He wanted it to look like a response to the offer. He went alone. 2 men with him. That's—" Marcus stopped. "That's less than usual." "Why didn't he tell me?" Marcus was quiet. "Because he knew I'd argue," she said. Not a question. "Because he knew if he told me beforehand, I'd tell him it was a bad decision." "Would you have?" Sandra asked. "Yes," Lillian said, "because it is a bad decision." She looked at the photograph on the phone, at her own image, oblivious, carrying her grocery bag 2 blocks from her apartment. Something was happening inside her chest, not quite panic, but adjacent to it. The specific cold that comes when you understand that something you've been treating as abstract has become concrete. "I want to know the moment he makes contact. The moment any of you hear from him, I want to know." "Ms. Carter, that's not—" "If you tell me that's not my department," she said quietly, "I will remind you that every single person in this building is my department, and that includes him, and if I don't hear from someone by 10 o'clock, I will make decisions about how to proceed that none of you are going to be comfortable with." Sandra looked at her for a long moment. 10 o'clock, she said. Lillian went back to the event space and finished the brunch setup. She directed the catering staff and checked the AV equipment and confirmed the seating arrangement with the corporate client's assistant. And she did all of this with the focused precision of someone whose competence was the only thing currently keeping her upright. At 9:52, Marcus appeared in the doorway again. "He's out," Marcus said. "Meeting's done. He's on his way back." She exhaled. Long and slow turned away so nobody on the catering staff saw it. "Thank you," she said. He came to the hotel at 11:30. She was in her office. She heard him come in, heard the shift in the way people moved in the hallway, the particular change in ambient attention that happened when Alexander Moretti walked through a space. She heard him exchange words with someone, and then her door opened. He looked not hurt, not exactly, but carrying something. She could see it in the way he held himself, the slight extra weight across his shoulders that meant the meeting had not gone the way he'd planned. She stood up. "Close the door," she said. He did. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She did not ask him how it went. She sat across from him and looked at him carefully and let the silence do what it needed to do. And after approximately 40 seconds, he said, "He knows about us." The word "us" landed in the room with a weight neither of them had attached to it before. Not in words. They hadn't used that word. "How much does he know?" she asked. "Enough." His jaw was tight. "He knows I care about you. He knows it in the specific way that people in my world communicate what they know, by telling me what they know would hurt you, what you fear, what you need." He stopped. "He knows about the debt, your father's medical debt. He knows the amount." She went very still. "He offered to make it disappear," Alexander said, "as part of his terms." "What are his terms?" "He wants me to give him the Port Authority contracts. The holding company has a minority stake in 2 shipping operations that connect to Port Authority coordination. He wants access to those channels, and in exchange—" He stopped. "In exchange, he would clear your father's debt and guarantee your safety going forward." She looked at him. The specific horror of what she was hearing was not the threat. It was the precision of it. That Caruso had looked at her life, had mapped it with the attention of someone who understood exactly what each thing meant, and had understood that her father's debt was not just a financial burden. It was a grief weight. It was the last piece of her father's life that was still costing her. Still bleeding, still making her choose between electric bills and medication copays, and a life that had any margin for anything good. Caruso had looked at that and turned it into a weapon. She breathed. "What did you tell him?" she said. Alexander was watching her very carefully. "I told him I needed time." "How much time did he give you?" 72 hours. She nodded. "Once." Processing. "Alexander," she said, "look at me." He did. "You are not going to give him those contracts," she said. "Lillian, I need you to hear me clearly." She kept her voice level, every word deliberate. "My father's debt is my responsibility. I have been carrying it for 2 years, and I will carry it until I pay it off, which I will do on my own, with my own work. You are not going to give a dangerous man access to things he will use to hurt other people in exchange for a financial benefit to me. I will not be the reason that happens." "The debt is mine," she said, "and the answer is no." He stared at her. "You don't have to be—" "I know I don't have to be anything," she said. "I'm choosing to be someone who doesn't let bad people win because they've found the right pressure point." She paused. "My father used to say the moment you let someone else's cruelty define your decisions, you've handed them the wheel. I'm not handing Caruso the wheel, and neither are you." The silence lasted a long time. "The debt is $240,000, he said. "I know what it is," she said. "On your salary it would take—" "Alexander," she stopped him. "I know what it takes. I have been doing the math for 2 years. I know exactly what it takes, and I'm still saying no." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that had come undone. In some way, some of the control had slipped, and what was underneath it was not anger or frustration, but something rawer than either. Something that looked very close to the verge of an emotion he clearly hadn't planned to arrive at in this conversation. "I need you to understand something," he said. "Tell me," she said. "I have made a lot of decisions in my life by calculating what was acceptable to lose," he said. "I have looked at situations, and I have decided that this person, or that thing, or this opportunity was an acceptable loss. It was how I survived. It was how I built everything. You decide what's acceptable to lose, and you move accordingly." He paused. "I cannot put you in that column. I've tried. Since the moment Caruso mentioned you, I have been trying to do the math the way I always do the math, and I cannot make you an acceptable loss. I cannot do it." She sat with that. "So what are you going to do?" she said quietly. I'm going to handle Caruso, he said, without giving him what he wants. And it's going to be complicated, and it's going to take longer than 72 hours, and it's going to require me to do some things that I'd rather not do in front of you. I'm not asking to watch, she said. I'm asking you not to make it worse by making it about me. He nodded slowly. Okay. And Alexander? She met his eyes. Don't go to his meetings alone again. He blinked. Marcus told me, she said. 2 men. After Caruso's people have been photographing me for 3 days. 2 men. I didn't want it to look hostile. I understand the strategy, she said. I'm telling you the strategy scared me. Don't do that again. He looked at her and she could see him recalibrating not what to say, but how to absorb what she'd said. That she'd been scared. That her being scared was information he was choosing to receive instead of deflect. Okay, he said again. She stood up. He stood up. They were close office distances, the specific proximity of a small room with 2 people in it, and she put her hand briefly on his arm. Just that. Just her hand on his arm. For 3 seconds, an entirely ordinary human gesture, the kind of thing 2 people who had been circling each other for weeks in a restaurant on Thursday nights might do when the circling had arrived somewhere. He looked down at her hand. When she took it away, he didn't move for a moment. I have a corporate brunch to check on, she said. I know, he said. She left the office. She called Gloria that evening, not to talk about Alexander. She called because she needed to talk to someone who would not let her be dramatic about things, and Gloria was constitutionally opposed to drama in exactly the right way. The Caruso situation is active, she said. I want you to be aware of it without specifics. Just eyes open for anything that feels off in the building. How long has it been active? Gloria said. Longer than I knew, Lillian admitted. Gloria was quiet for a moment. Then, you care about him. I'm not asking, Gloria said. I'm telling you what I see. You care about him. That's not a problem, Ms. Carter. The problem is when you start making decisions based on what you hope he is instead of what you know he is. What do you know he is? Lillian said. Complicated, Gloria said. But not bad. Not essentially bad. Complicated is survivable. A pause. Bad is not. She sat with that after she hung up. Gloria was not wrong. She never was about the things that mattered. Complicated was survivable. She told herself that 3 more times before she went to sleep. The 72 hours passed. She knew this because she counted them quietly while going about the ordinary operations of the hotel, the conference management and the vendor calls and the scheduling adjustments that were the day-to-day reality of her job, which she performed with her usual focused competence, while underneath it the clock ran. 72 hours. Nothing happened. No call from Alexander, no visit from Caruso's people, no envelope slipped under her office door or conversation that stopped half a second too quickly when she walked into a room. Just work. Just the hotel. Just Thursday approaching. She was reviewing the October revenue report on Wednesday afternoon when her phone rang. Unknown number, but a New York area code, and she had stopped ignoring unknown numbers since the night Diane had called her about the job. She answered, Ms. Carter. The voice was male, even, measured in the specific way of someone who had practiced measuring it. My name is Vincent Caruso. I think it's time we spoke directly. The cold moved through her again, faster this time. She pressed her hand flat on the desk. Mr. Caruso, she said, how did you get this number? The same way your employer did roughly 3 months ago. A pause, a quality in it that was almost amused. Almost. I understand you're a practical woman. I appreciate practical people. I'd like to make you an offer. Mr. Moretti already told me about your offer, she said. The answer is no. That was his answer, Caruso said. I'm asking for yours. she breathed. The debt your father left behind is not a small thing, he said. I know what it's cost you. I know what you've sacrificed for 2 years to keep your head above it. I'm offering to eliminate it. Not as charity, as a transaction. You would simply need to have one conversation with me about the operational logistics of Mr. Moretti's holdings. Not sensitive. Nothing that would hurt him significantly. Just information a person in your position would naturally have. Her hand was completely still on the desk. Mr. Caruso, she said. Yes. I want you to understand something, she said, and her voice was not loud and not angry, because loudness and anger were things she was choosing not to give him. I have spent 2 years working jobs I didn't love because people I love don't get to just leave when things get hard. I paid for my father's care while working 2 jobs, and I am currently paying his debt while doing it again, and I will keep doing it until it is done, and I will not sell information about a man I care about to the person who is trying to hurt him, regardless of how much you offer, and regardless of how precisely you've understood my financial situation. Silence. You care about him, Caruso said. That's not your business. It's very much my business, he said. More than you know. Then I'll tell you what I'd tell any business associate who tried to leverage my grief, she said. You've misread what I'm willing to do. That's an expensive mistake in your world, I'm told. A pause, longer than the others. You're not afraid of me, Caruso said. I didn't say that, she said. No? He agreed. You didn't. Another pause. I'll be in touch, Ms. Carter. He hung up. She sat without moving for exactly 30 seconds. Then she called Alexander. He picked up in one ring. Caruso just called me directly, she said. He made the offer to me instead. Information about you in exchange for the debt clearance. The silence on his end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Are you at the hotel? His voice had changed. Yes. Stay there, he said. I'm coming. Alexander, please, he said. The word was different in his voice, not a command softened, an actual request. Please stay there. She looked at her office door. At the hotel beyond it, her hotel, its 63 staff, its operations that she had built into something functional and good and genuinely hers. I'm here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. She heard him exhale. I told him no, she said, in case you were wondering. Another silence. I wasn't wondering, he said. No, he said. I knew. He arrived in 22 minutes. She heard him before she saw him, the change in the building's atmosphere, that specific shift, but different this time. Faster. Tighter. He came into her office, and he looked at her, and the expression on his face was not the composed, controlled default she had come to know across weeks of Thursday dinners and office conversations. He looked frightened. She had never seen him frightened. She hadn't been sure he had the capacity for it in the way that people who spend years behind walls sometimes lose the reflex for the emotions that require exposure. He was frightened of what had almost happened, of how close Caruso had come to her, of the phone call that had crossed the line from information and leverage into direct contact. I'm fine, she said immediately. I know, he said, but he didn't move from the doorway. Alexander, she said. Come in. He came in. He sat down. He put his hands flat on his knees, and she watched him with what looked like significant effort choose steadiness over what was underneath it. He's escalating, Alexander said. I noticed, she said. The call to you directly is a message to me. He's telling me that the 48 hours I took beyond his deadline have cost something. What's his actual goal? She asked. Not the contracts. Underneath the contracts. He looked at her. He wants me to make a mistake, he said. He wants me to do something reactive and damaging because I'm frightened for you. He wants me to act from emotion instead of strategy. Because if I do that, I lose the thing that's always kept me ahead of people like him, which is that I'm better at the long calculation than they are. Then don't, she said. Lillian. His voice was low. He called you. He did, she said. And I told him no, And I called you, and I am sitting here. Nothing has changed except that we now know the escalation timeline is shorter than we thought. She looked at him steadily. What is the long calculation? He was quiet for a moment. Caruso has a weakness, he said slowly. He has always had a weakness. There's a federal investigation that has been building for 14 months. It hasn't touched him yet because he's been careful. But careful people make mistakes when they're overextended. If Caruso is escalating this fast, it means he needs those port contracts soon, which means something in his operation is under pressure from the investigation, which means he's not in a position of strength, she said. He's in a position of urgency. Alexander looked at her. He's bluffing, she said. The speed, the call to me, the deadline. It's all urgency because he doesn't have time to play the long game. You do. He stared at her. When did you... He stopped. How did you work that out? Because I've been paying attention, she said. To you, to how you think, and because panicked people always move too fast. He moved too fast. She paused. What do you need to protect yourself from the federal angle? Distance, he said. From anything that looks like what he wants it to look like. And time. Then buy time, she said. And be careful. And... She stopped. And, he said. And let me help, she said. Not with the complicated parts. Not with the things I need to not know about. But with the thinking. You've been carrying all of this alone, and alone is not where you do your best work. I've seen you think when you have someone to think with. You're better at it. He looked at her for a long time. You know this is not what operations coordinators do, he said. I know, she said. I'm doing it anyway. He reached across this desk and covered her hand with his. Not a dramatic gesture, not romantic in any performed way, just a hand over a hand, solid and certain in the particular way of someone who had spent a very long time not touching anything they weren't prepared to lose and had just decided to stop calculating that way. She turned her hand over. They sat like that for a moment. I'm going to fix this, he said. And for the first time since she'd known him, the statement didn't have the quality of a control mechanism or a reassurance designed to manage her reaction. It had the quality of a promise being made by someone who understood the difference. I know, she said, but somewhere in the part of her that paid attention to things she couldn't see. Yet the same part that had noticed Eddie's gray face 3 weeks before. She understood why she felt it. The thing that was building. The thing that Caruso's call had triggered and Alexander's promised patience hadn't stopped. Something was about to break loose. She could feel it the way her father had always said you could feel weather. Not in your mind. In your chest. A pressure change. A held breath. She held his hand tighter. And she waited to find out what shape it would take when it arrived. The thing broke loose on a Friday. She was in the middle of a call with the November event coordinator, a corporate holiday booking 40-people dinner and an award ceremony when Marcus appeared in her doorway for the third time in 6 weeks with that expression. The one that had a specific shape she now recognized as clearly as a weather pattern. She held up one finger to him, finished the call, hung up. Tell me, she said. There was an incident this morning, Marcus said. At one of Mr. Moretti's other properties, not the hotel. What kind of incident? The kind that has a body attached to it. She was very still for a moment. Not Mr. Moretti, Marcus said, immediately reading her expression. Not his people. It was one of Caruso's men, found outside a warehouse on the west side that Mr. Moretti has a holding stake in. Caruso's man, she said slowly. At Alexander's property. Staged, Marcus said. We believe it's staged, but the police responded at 6 this morning. They're asking questions, and the DA's office has been contacted. She understood the architecture of this, immediately the elegance of it in the specific terrible way that calculated malice is sometimes elegant. Caruso, under federal pressure, losing time, unable to get what he wanted through direct negotiation, had found a faster route. Plant a body. Connect it to Alexander's property. Create a crisis that would force Alexander to move reactively, to make visible decisions, to expose himself to exactly the kind of scrutiny that the federal investigation had been building toward for 14 months. "Where is Alexander right now?" she said. "With his attorneys," Marcus said. "He's been there since 7. Has he been contacted by the police directly?" "Not yet. The attorneys are managing the initial response." "Okay." She stood up. She felt the specific clarity that arrived when a situation became undeniable, and the only useful response was forward motion. "I need you to do something, and I need you to do it without asking me why." Marcus waited. "The federal investigation into Caruso," she said. "Alexander mentioned it's been active for 14 months. That means there's a federal team. That means there's a lead investigator. I need that name." Marcus stared at her. "Ms. Carter." "Marcus, I am not asking you to do anything with that information. I just need the name and whatever's publicly known about the investigation's scope. Not classified information, not anything from inside, just what's already out there." He was quiet for 10 seconds, long enough that she thought he was going to refuse. "Give me an hour," he said. She spent the hour doing exactly what she always did when something was threatening to pull her off her axis. She worked. She confirmed the November booking, reviewed the December event inquiry, responded to the maintenance department about the elevator service contract she was still arguing about with the vendor. She did these things with a focused precision that was not denial. It was practice. The practice of having a life that continued regardless of what was collapsing around the edges of it. Her father had taught her that. He had gone to his appointments and asked the nurses about their families and cracked the same 3 jokes he'd been making for 20 years, even during the months when the news was bad. Not because he was performing normalcy, but because normalcy was the thing he could control when everything else wasn't. Marcus came back in 50 minutes. "Special Agent Patricia Doyle," he said. "Eastern District. She's been the lead on the Caruso investigation since it opened. Her name is attached to 2 court filings that are public record. And," he paused, "there's something else." "Tell me." "There was a piece in the Post 8 months ago, a profile of the investigation. It quoted an anonymous source inside Caruso's organization who said the investigation was getting close to something significant. The Post piece is still online. It mentions the Port Authority angle specifically." Lillian looked at him. "Caruso knows the investigation is close to the port contracts." "That's what it looks like," Marcus said. "That's why he needed Alexander's cooperation so fast," she said. "That's why he moved to direct contact so quickly. He's not trying to expand his operation. He's trying to build a shield. If he controls the port contracts through Alexander's holdings, he has a layer of legitimate business between himself and whatever the federal team is looking at." "Using Mr. Moretti's legitimacy as cover," Marcus said slowly. "Exactly." She sat back. "And the body at the warehouse this morning isn't just pressure. It's the backup plan. If Alexander won't give him the cover willingly, Caruso creates a situation where Alexander is too busy managing a police investigation to function as an obstacle. 2 strategies running simultaneously. He hedges." Marcus looked at her with an expression that was some combination of respect and unease. "How do you know how to think like this?" "I managed a hospital administrative department for 2 years, she said. "People are always running 2 strategies simultaneously. Usually they're less deadly, but the structure is the same." She picked up her phone, called Alexander. He answered on the first ring. "Lillian, I know where you are," she said. "I know what happened this morning. Don't talk, just listen." She laid it out for him. The port contracts as a federal shield. The warehouse as a backup pressure mechanism. The 14-month investigation, the Post article, the specific shape of Caruso's urgency. "He's not strong," she said. "He's cornered. Cornered and smart and fast-moving, which makes him dangerous, but he's not operating from a position of power. He's operating from desperation." Silence on the other end. "Patricia Doyle," she said. "Special Agent Eastern District. She's been building this case for over a year, Alexander. She wants Caruso." If Caruso is trying to use your holdings as a federal shield, that means you have information relevant to her investigation that she probably doesn't have. The warehouse situation this morning, a body found at your property staged by his people, that's evidence of his operation, not yours. More silence. You're telling me to go to the federal investigators, he said. I'm telling you to consider it, she said. I know what that means for you. I know what your world says about that option. I know it's not simple. But I'm also telling you that the way out of a trap is not to fight harder inside it. It's to change what the trap is made of. A long silence. My attorneys would never advise this, he said. I know. I'm not your attorney. You're my operations coordinator, he said. Right now, she said, I'm the person who is telling you the truth because I don't have a financial incentive to tell you anything else. You said yourself that's rare, so hear it. The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. Let me think, he said. Think fast, she said. Caruso is moving fast, and the warehouse situation is going to require a public response before end of day. He said, I'll call you back. She hung up and sat with what she'd just done for approximately 30 seconds. She had just told a man with a complicated history to consider cooperating with a federal investigation. She was aware of how many ways that advice could go wrong. She was aware of the layers of consequence she couldn't fully see. She was also aware that it was right. Sometimes those two things coexisted without resolving. She went back to the November event plan. He called her back 47 minutes later. My attorneys are having a complete breakdown, he said. Are they wrong? A pause. About the risk, no. About whether it's the right move. Another pause. Also, no. Alexander, I know, he said. I know Lillian. I know. He sounded different. The particular sound of someone who has made a decision that costs something and is still in the first few minutes of having made it. I'm going to need a few days. I need to structure this correctly or it falls apart, but... He stopped. Yes, I'm going to do it. She closed her eyes for a moment. Okay, she said. Are you... He stopped again. Are you at the hotel? Yes. Stay there tonight, he said. I'm going to have Marcus add 2 people to the building security rotation. Not because I think Caruso will move on the hotel, but because I need... His voice shifted slightly. Something in it she'd heard before in Thursday restaurant booths in the quiet after honest sentences. Something that didn't wear armor. I need to know where you are. I'll stay until 7, she said. Then I'm going home. I'm not going to hide in my own workplace, Alexander. I know, he said. 7 is fine. Marcus will have someone with you. I don't need Lillian. Just her name. In a voice that was not commanding anything, just asking. Just the voice of someone who needed the one thing they'd found that mattered to be in a specific place they could account for. Okay, she said. Until 7. Then I'm going home. Thank you, he said. She stayed until 7:15 because Paulo made her eat something at 6:30, and she didn't have the energy to leave in the middle of a bowl of soup that Paulo had made specifically and with what she recognized as pointed emotional communication. You look like you're holding up a building with your shoulders, Paulo said. I'm fine, she said. I didn't ask, he said. Eat the soup. She ate the soup. The next 3 days were very long. She didn't see Alexander. She heard from Marcus brief operational updates delivered with the economy of a man who had learned to communicate in precisely as many words as necessary and no more. The attorneys were managing the warehouse situation. The police inquiry had not escalated. Alexander was having careful, structured, attorney-present conversations with people whose names Marcus did not share, which she understood to mean people in federal offices. The hotel ran. That was what she had. She ran the hotel with her customary precision, and she had the Thursday dinner alone for the first time in 6 weeks, sitting in Henry's restaurant with the soup that had been the same since 1973, and the photograph of the King of Thailand on the wall, and an empty chair across from her that she looked at exactly once. Henry brought 2 soups without being asked. She looked up at him. "For when he comes back," Henry said simply, and took the extra bowl away again immediately, and she thought she might actually cry for a moment, before she gathered herself and finished her dinner like a person who had things under control. She did not cry. She went home. She sat with Mrs. Nguyen for an hour, which was something she did when she needed to be around someone who existed entirely outside the complicated world she'd stepped into. Someone for whom the whole of what mattered was whether the soup was good, and whether her hands hurt today, and whether the magnolia tree outside her window was going to make it through another winter. "You seem far away," Mrs. Nguyen said. "I'm right here," Lillian said. "Your body is right here," Mrs. Nguyen said. "You are somewhere else." She studied Lillian with the patience of someone for whom observation was the primary occupation of her days. "Someone is worrying you." "I'm worrying about someone," Lillian said. "It's different." "Is it?" She thought about that. "Yes," she said. "When you worry about someone else, it's because they matter. It's not a bad thing to feel even when it's uncomfortable." Mrs. Nguyen was quiet for a moment. "Your father used to sit in that chair and worry about you," she said. "Every time you were having a hard stretch. He'd come and have tea, and he'd sit right where you're sitting now, and he'd look exactly the way you look now." Lillian stilled. "He worried about you," Mrs. Nguyen said gently. "Because you mattered. Same principle." She sat with that for a while. She went home at 9. She slept better than she had any right to. Alexander called on Sunday evening. "I need to see you," he said. "Not at the hotel. Can I come to you?" She looked at her apartment. 200 square feet of peeling paint and 1 window facing a brick wall. "Yes," she said. "Come here." He arrived 20 minutes later, which meant he'd been nearby, which she noted and didn't comment on. He came in and stood in her apartment and looked at it with the expression of someone who was seeing something clearly for the first time. Not the smallness of it or the peeling paint, but the specific personality of a space. The photograph of her father on the wall, the stack of library books on the table, the notepad by the bed with the numbers. She was always calculating the jar of buttons on the windowsill that she'd bought at a flea market 2 years ago, because something about it had reminded her of home. He looked at the jar of buttons for a long moment. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make tea." "You don't have to." "I know," she said. "Sit down." He sat at her small kitchen table. She made tea. She put 2 cups on the table and sat across from him in the specific ordinary intimacy of her kitchen on a Sunday night and waited. "I met with the federal team on Friday," he said. She wrapped her hands around her cup. "How did it go?" "It's going to be a process," he said. "There are things they want. There are things I can give them, and things I can't, and things I won't. My attorneys and their attorneys are—" He paused. "It's going to take time, but the warehouse situation is handled. They understand that it was staged. They had actually been tracking the same Caruso operation that placed the body, and this confirmed a thread they'd been following. So it backfired on him," she said. "Significantly?" He picked up his cup, set it down. "Caruso is going to know within days that I've made contact with the federal team. When he knows that—" He stopped. "The situation changes. His leverage disappears. His threat disappears. But so does whatever patience he might have been maintaining. So he becomes less predictable," she said. "Yes." She looked at him across her kitchen table. "Are you safe?" "Safer than I was last week," he said. "The federal connection creates a specific kind of protection that I didn't have before. It's not the kind I'm used to, but it's real." "Good," she said. He was looking at her, at the apartment around her, at the photograph of her father. "Tell me about him," he said. "Your father." She blinked. "Now, we've been talking about Caruso and attorneys and federal investigations for 3 weeks, he said. "And I'm sitting in your apartment on a Sunday night, and I want to know about your father. Is that all right?" She looked at him for a moment. at the man who had walked into her office and sat in the chair across from her desk, and over weeks of Thursday dinners and careful conversations, had become someone she was learning to know. Who had held her hand across a desk while something frightening gathered at the edges? Who had stood at the top of a subway staircase and said, "I'm not good at this," with the honesty of someone who had decided to try anyway. He was a mechanic, she said. For 30 years, same garage in Queens. He had the most specific memory I've ever encountered. He remembered every car he'd ever worked on. Not the make and model, but the specifics. A 2003 Honda Accord with a custom air freshener that smelled like vanilla. A 1998 Subaru whose owner always left 3/4 in the cup holder. He remembered them all. She smiled, and it was the specific kind that arrives when remembering something that hurts and comforts simultaneously. He used to say that every object tells you about the person who owns it. That if you paid attention to what people chose to keep and what they chose to throw away, you understood them. Alexander was listening. Completely. The way he always listened, tracking content, not waiting for his turn. He would have looked at your watch, she said, and told me something about you. What would he have said? She thought about it honestly. That you bought it when you were trying to communicate something you didn't have words for yet. That it's not about the money, it's about having a language when other languages failed. He looked down at the watch, said nothing for a moment. He sounds like he would have been a difficult man to lie to, he said. Impossible, she said. He had this ability to just wait. You'd say something that wasn't quite true, and he'd just look at you and wait, and eventually the silence was more uncomfortable than the truth, and you'd tell him the truth. She paused. I do that too, apparently. People keep telling me. Alexander's expression shifted. Something that was not quite the laugh from the Thai restaurant, but was in the same family, an expression that arrived without planning and stayed. You do, he said. Yes. They drank tea. Outside, the city made the sounds cities make at 9 o'clock on Sunday nights, the particular quieter version of itself, the reduced traffic, and the distant sound of someone's television through a shared wall. I've been thinking about what comes after, he said. After what? After Caruso. He looked at his cup. After all of this settles, however it settles. He paused. I've been thinking about what I do differently. She waited. The port contacts, the holdings that operate in the gray spaces, the arrangements that have been in place since before I had choices about them. He stopped. I've been thinking about what I owe the people who work for me. Not owe in the sense of obligation, in the sense of... He seemed to be reaching for something he didn't have established language for. In the sense of what I would want if the positions were reversed. She looked at him carefully. What would you want? A way out that didn't erase everything that came before it, he said. A chance to have built something that lasted without the parts that required me to be someone I'm not sure I wanted to be. He met her eyes. I got into this world because of my father, because of choices he made before I could make my own. And I stayed because leaving seemed impossible. But lately, he stopped. Lately, she said, lately I've been thinking about what's actually impossible, and what I've just decided is impossible because imagining otherwise required too much. She set down her cup. What does differently look like? She said. Concretely. What does it actually look like? He was quiet for a moment, working through it honestly the way she'd learned he did with things that mattered. The legitimate holdings are profitable, genuinely profitable. The Meridian 3 other properties, 2 investment stakes in real estate development. If I divested from the other operations, the ones that aren't... He stopped, found a different word. The ones that require a different kind of management. If I separated completely, it would take time. It would cost things. But it's not. He stopped again. It's not impossible. What has it been? She said. Unnecessary, he said. Nobody required it. Nobody was asking for it. And I had built something that functioned, and changing things that function requires a reason. She looked at him. What's the reason? She said. He met her eyes across the kitchen table, in her 200-square-foot apartment on a Sunday night. You know the reason, he said. She did know. She had known it since he'd held her hand across her desk, and his face had done the thing it did when armor was an option he'd decided not to take. She had known it in Tuesday restaurants and on sidewalks, and in the specific way he said her name when something was true, and he needed her to know he meant it. That's a very large thing to build a reason on, she said carefully. I know, he said, but the small reasons weren't working. He paused. My mother's principle. Power that makes people's lives easier. I told you about it. I've been thinking about it since the night I told you, since I said it out loud to someone for the first time in 20 years. And I think... His voice was quiet. I think she would say I've been building the wrong thing, that the structure I built is capable of something better than what I've used it for. She was quiet for a moment. She would say that, Lillian said softly, based on what you've told me about her. Yes, that's exactly what she would say. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been carrying the question of that for a long time, and having it answered even quietly, even speculatively, released something. I'm not there yet, he said. I want to be clear about that. This is not a declaration. This is... He stopped. A direction, she said. Yes, he said. A direction. She nodded slowly. A direction is enough. They sat in the quiet of her kitchen for a while. The tea went cold. Neither of them moved to make more. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression changed. Not dramatically, he had too much control for dramatic changes, but she had learned his face well enough to read the subtle version. The slight tightening. The recalibration. It's Marcus, he said. I have to take this. Take it, she said. He stood, moved slightly toward the window, answered. She heard Marcus's voice as an indistinct murmur and watched Alexander's face do its careful work of receiving information and processing it without performing the processing. He was on the call for 4 minutes. When he hung up, he turned to her. Caruso knows about the federal contact, he said. Someone in my attorney's office talked. Marcus doesn't know who yet. She stood up. How long do we have before he reacts? She said. Marcus thinks he knows already. The call that told us about it happened 20 minutes ago, and his people were seen outside 2 of my properties within the last hour. Is the hotel? Not yet. Marcus has it covered. He was already moving, reaching for his jacket. But I need to go. I need to be where Marcus is, and I need to... He stopped, looked at her. I need you to not be here tonight. What? Your apartment, he said. You're 2 blocks from your usual route. Caruso's people know this building. They've been photographing you for weeks. I need you somewhere else tonight. She looked at him. Alexander. Lillian. His voice was very quiet, very certain. Please, let me do this one thing. Let me know you're somewhere safe while I deal with this. She held his gaze. Gloria, she said. I'll call Gloria. Something in his face relaxed slightly. Okay. Go tonight. Don't take your usual route. Take a car. You're taking one too, she said. You're not going to Marcus without a full security detail. Not tonight. He almost argued. She could see him almost argue. Okay, he said. She walked him to the door. He stopped in the doorway, the same doorway where she'd lived her ordinary life, where she'd come home late from the bakery, with flour on her jacket, where she had stood on the other side not so long ago, and understood none of what was coming. When this is over, he said. She waited. When this is over, he said again, like he was deciding whether to finish the sentence. When it's over, she said, you can finish that sentence. He looked at her. Something in his face that she carried with her afterward, through the call to Gloria, and the packed bag, and the car that Marcus sent, and the strange temporary shelter of Gloria's guest room, where she lay in the dark and listened to the city and breathed. Something that was not a declaration. That was a direction. That was enough. She called Mrs. Nguyen to let her know she'd be gone for a night. Mrs. Nguyen said she would water Lillian's plant. Lillian didn't have a plant, but she didn't correct her because Mrs. Nguyen, knowing there was a reason to go check, was its own kind of safety. She lay in Gloria's guest room and thought about buttons in a jar on a windowsill, about a mechanic in Queens who remembered every car by the thing its owner chose to keep in it, about a dry cleaning business on Canal Street, and a woman who had taught her son that the only power worth having was the kind that made things easier for other people. She thought about directions, about how the most significant things rarely arrive as declarations. They arrive the way Alexander Moretti had arrived in her life by accident on a wet sidewalk while she was exhausted and not looking for anything at all. And then they stay. And then one day you realize the shape of your life has quietly rearranged itself around them. She thought about that. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unsaved number that she knew immediately. It said, "Gloria's building has good security." I checked. She stared at the screen. She typed back, "Of course you did. 3 seconds. Get some sleep." She set the phone down on the nightstand. She was smiling again. That same involuntary reflex from the subway platform weeks ago before she was aware of deciding to do it. Her face doing the honest thing without waiting for permission. She closed her eyes. Outside, whatever was moving in Alexander's world was moving. Caruso was reacting. Marcus was managing, attorneys were making calls, and the city was doing what it always did, grinding forward, indifferent and relentless, full of people carrying things they hadn't chosen to carry. She let it move without her for one night. She trusted that he was out there making the long calculation, choosing the right thing over the fast thing, moving in a direction even if the direction was still becoming visible. She trusted that. And sometime just before midnight, for the second time in a week, she fell asleep before she expected to. Morning came fast. Her phone was ringing at 6:42, and she was already half awake because Gloria's apartment faced east and the light came in early, and with conviction. Marcus. "Ms. Carter," he said. She sat up. "Tell me." "It's over," he said. She was very still. "Federal team moved on Caruso at 4 this morning," Marcus said. "There were warrants, multiple properties. They had apparently been ready to move for 3 weeks and were waiting for one more piece of evidence. The warehouse incident last Friday was, according to what we're hearing, the piece they needed. Clear evidence of obstruction and conspiracy that they could attach directly to him." She breathed. "Alexander," she said. "Here," said Alexander's voice. He'd been on the call the whole time, she realized. Marcus had him on the line already. "I'm here. Are you all right?" "Yes," he said. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum. The specific feeling of something that has been held very tight for a very long time, releasing all at once, not comfortable, not exactly, because release has its own particular physical quality, like blood returning to a limb that has been compressed. "Your father's debt," Alexander said. She stiffened slightly. "Alexander, let me finish," he said. "I'm not offering to pay it. I know what your answer would be. I'm telling you that there is a legal process through which Caruso's seized assets will be distributed through the federal restitution program, and that you, as someone who was directly targeted as part of his criminal enterprise, have standing to file a claim. My attorney will explain the specifics. It's your choice whether to pursue it." She was quiet. "That's different," she said finally. "Yes," he said. "It is. The federal process. Entirely above board," he said. "Entirely your decision." She looked at the east-facing window in Gloria's guest room, at the morning light coming in with its early conviction, the kind of light that didn't ask permission. "I'll talk to the attorney," she said. "Okay," he said. A pause. "Lillian," he said. "Yes." "I want to finish the sentence," he said. "From last night, in your doorway. I want to finish it." She waited. "When this is over," he said, and his voice was the version she knew best, now the one without armor, the one that had learned to stop sounding like a man performing control and had started sounding like a person speaking. "I want to build something worth having, and I want you to be part of what that looks like." She sat in Gloria's guest room in the early morning light. She thought about accidentally bumping into the most dangerous man in the city on a wet sidewalk. She thought about how the things that change your life completely almost never look like what you expected them to look like. She thought about a direction. "Come to the hotel at noon," she said. "I'll make sure Henry sends soup." A pause. And then from Alexander Moretti, the most feared man in New York, the man who had once stood on a sidewalk while an entire street went silent around him, the man who had spent years building walls and never once let himself forget why he'd built them, came a sound. Small, surprised out of him, real. The laugh. "Noon," he said. "I'll be there." He was there at 11:53. She knew because Eddie called up from the front desk. Eddie, who was back at his post and had been for 3 weeks now, who had found his way back to himself in the specific way that young people do when a threat is removed and the world reassembles itself into something recognizable again. "Ms. Carter," Eddie said. "Mr. Moretti is in the lobby." "Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes," she said. She finished the email she was writing to the November event client, sent it, closed her laptop, and sat for exactly 30 seconds, doing nothing. Just breathing. Just letting the morning settle into her body. The call with Marcus Alexander's voice on the line, the thing he'd said in her doorway, completed finally after a night of suspension. "When this is over, I want to build something worth having. And I want you to be part of what that looks like." She had carried those words through Gloria's guest room, and through the car ride back to her apartment to change, and through the morning's work, like something held carefully in both hands. Not fragile exactly. More like something that needed to be handled with attention before it could be put down properly. She went downstairs. He was standing near the concierge desk. Not in the posture she'd first known him in, not the occupied space as statement stance of the sidewalk or the early hotel visits. He was standing the way people stand when they're tired, in the honest way, the way that has nothing to do with weakness, and everything to do with having held something very heavy for a very long time and just set it down. He looked, she thought, like a person. Not a reputation, not a name that made streets go silent. A person in a hotel lobby on a Monday morning who had been through something difficult and had come out the other side of it and was standing here because here was where she was. "You're early," she said. "Habit," he said. And then after a pause, "I didn't want to wait." She looked at him for a moment. "Come on," she said. "Henry is sending soup." They sat at the corner table, the one where she'd first had coffee with him, where he had checked the door twice, and she had noticed and filed it away. He didn't check the door this time. She noticed that too. Filed it. The soup arrived before they'd said anything of consequence, because Henry had apparently been informed of the approximate arrival time, and had planned accordingly, and when he set the bowls down, he looked at both of them with the expression of a man who had been watching people in his restaurant for decades, and knew a chapter ending when he saw one. "Good morning," Henry said simply, and went back to his kitchen. Alexander looked at the soup. He knew. "Henry always knows," she said. "Eat." He ate. She ate. The restaurant filled around them with the ordinary Monday population business lunches, assembling a table of women who met here weekly based on the fluency of their greeting, a young couple near the window who were clearly on a first date and handling it with varying degrees of success. "Tell me what happened this morning," she said. "Not the legal summary, what actually happened." He set down his spoon. The federal team executed 17 warrants simultaneously. 4 of Caruso's primary properties, 3 financial accounts, 2 business partnerships. They had been waiting for corroborating evidence on the obstruction charge, which the warehouse staged event provided directly. The arrest happened at 4:18 this morning at his residence in Westchester. "Were you informed before or after?" "My attorney called me at 4:52. Marcus had it at 4:47 from a separate source." A pause. "I was already awake." "You didn't sleep?" "No," he said. "I didn't sleep." She looked at him. At the specific quality of someone who had spent a night with too much to process and no way to make it go faster. "I kept thinking," he said, "about the attorney in my office who talked, who gave Caruso the information about the federal contact. Marcus identified him by 6 yesterday evening. He's been removed." "How?" she said carefully. "Legally," Alexander said. "I was specific about that." Whatever else I have done in my life, when people have betrayed my trust this time, I was specific about doing it legally. He met her eyes. I want you to know that. I know, she said. Do you? Yes, she said. I believe you. Something in his shoulders changed. Not visibly dramatic, just a fraction of tension that had been waiting for that sentence releasing. The federal team will want continued cooperation, he said. For several months, possibly longer. My attorneys are structuring an agreement. I'm going to cooperate fully with the Caruso prosecution. I'm going to provide documentation on several other operations that the investigation has been building toward. He paused. It's going to require disclosure of things I would not have disclosed 6 months ago. I know, she said. Some of those things reflect badly on decisions I've made. I know that too. You're not going to tell me it doesn't matter, he said. No, she said. It matters. The things you've done matter. The people who were affected by them matter. What also matters is what you do now. She picked up her soup spoon. Those two things can both be true at the same time. He was quiet for a moment. You're not going to make this easy, are you? He said. Not a question. Not quite. I'm not going to make it false, she said. There's a difference. Easy would mean pretending the past is simpler than it is. I'm not going to do that, but I'm also not going to pretend the present doesn't count. She met his eyes. You went to the federal team. You could have run or fought or found another way around it. You chose the harder thing. You told me to, he said. I suggested it, she said. You chose it. Those are different. He looked at her for a long moment. My father would have called me a fool, he said. For this, for all of it. He spent his life building the thing I'm now cooperating with a federal investigation to dismantle. What do you call yourself? She said. He thought about it. Really thought about it with the specific quality of attention he gave to questions that deserved it. Someone who figured out too late what things were worth, he said, and is trying to be accurate about it now. She nodded slowly. That's a good answer. Is it enough? It's a start, she said, which is all anything ever is. Henry came by and refilled their water without being asked the way he always did, and looked at neither of them directly, the way he also always did, giving the table the privacy of being unobserved while being completely seen. I have something to tell you, Alexander said. Something in the way he said it made her put her spoon down. Last night, he said, while you were at Gloria's, after the federal team moved after the call settled down, and Marcus had everything under control, I went to the Meridian. She blinked. Why? I don't know exactly. I just ended up there. The building was quiet. Night staff. Paulo had left something in the kitchen for whoever came through, which I understand he does regularly. A pause. I sat in your office. She stared at him. I wasn't going through anything, he said quickly. I just sat in the chair, the one across from your desk, the one I always sit in. He looked at the table, and I understood something that I'd been... He stopped. I've been building for a long time. Buildings, operations, systems, structures. I'm very good at building things. What I am not good at, what I have never been good at, is knowing what I was building toward. What the point of it was. And sitting in your office at 2 a.m, I understood that I had never been in a space that felt like it had a clear purpose until you put your fingerprints on it. He stopped. I'm not trying to say I can't function independently. I function. I've functioned for 20 years. I know, she said. I'm saying that function and purpose are not the same thing, he said. And I didn't know that until recently. She looked at him across the table, at the soup getting cold between them again, the way it always did when the conversation arrived somewhere that made food irrelevant. What's the purpose? She said. I don't know the whole shape of it yet, he said. But I know part of it is the legitimate holdings, expanding them, running them the way you've been running the Meridian. He paused. The way you've been running the Meridian is what I wanted all of them to be. I just didn't know how to build that without someone who understood that the people in the building mattered as much as the building. She was quiet. I want to offer you something. he said. She waited. I have 3 other properties that need what the Meridian has now, and I have the investment stakes in 2 development projects that are going to require the kind of operational oversight that Diane has been managing from a distance and doing badly. He looked at her. I want to offer you a role that covers all of it. Not just the Meridian, a senior operations position, real authority, real scope. He paused. Commensurate compensation. She looked at him for a long moment. Is this personal or professional? She said. Both, he said, transparently and without apology. She held his gaze. You understand that I will run those properties exactly the way I've run this one. That I will renegotiate every contract that's overpriced challenge, every arrangement that doesn't serve the people in the building, and call you directly when something is wrong. I'm counting on it, he said, and you understand that the personal part of this and the professional part of this have to be completely separate in terms of how decisions get made. That I will not change an operational judgment because of the other thing. I know, he said. That's part of why I'm asking you. The only reason I trust that this would work is because I know you won't. She picked up her soup spoon. I'll have conditions, she said. I expected that, he said, in writing. Of course. Reviewed by an independent attorney, not yours. Agreed. She ate a spoonful of soup. He watched her, waiting with the patience of a man who had learned slowly, and at some cost, that waiting was sometimes the right thing. Yes, she said finally. He exhaled, small and controlled, but she heard it. One more thing, she said. What? Gloria gets a raise, she said. She's been running housekeeping at the Meridian with a team that's understaffed by 3 people. That gets fixed. This week. He stared at her. She's been there 7 years, Lillian said. She told me when I started that she'd buy me a coffee if I lasted 6 months. She bought it at 3 weeks. She deserves a raise and proper staffing. Done, he said. You didn't even hesitate. She helped keep you safe when I needed someone to, he said simply. She gets whatever she wants. Lillian looked at him. Then she picked up her water glass. He picked up his. They weren't toasting anything in particular, or maybe they were toasting everything. The end of something that had been frightening, and the beginning of something that was still becoming clear, and the soup that had been the same since 1973, and a jar of buttons on a windowsill, and a laugh surprised out of a man who had forgotten how to have one. Their glasses touched. Henry saw it from across the restaurant and turned around immediately, giving them the privacy of that moment, and she liked him very much for that. Shan. The weeks that followed moved in 2 registers simultaneously. The public register was organized and visible. The federal cooperation process managed by attorneys and documented carefully moved forward. Caruso's arraignment was covered briefly in the Post, a paragraph below the fold, the kind of coverage that powerful men receive when they fall significant enough to note small enough to not dignify with a full column. Alexander's name appeared in none of it, which his attorneys had worked to ensure, and which the federal team had agreed to as part of the cooperation structure. The private register was quieter. Gloria got her raise on Wednesday. She came to Lillian's office to say thank you, and then stood in the doorway for a moment and said, "You're staying, not as a question." "I'm staying," Lillian said. Gloria nodded once with the satisfaction of someone whose investment in a judgment call had paid off. Paulo made something different for lunch the day the Caruso arrest was confirmed in the news. Not soup, but a full meal. Set at the small table in the hotel kitchen that was technically not for guests, but which Lillian had been eating at for weeks, because Paulo had decided early on that she was the kind of person who should eat proper food, and had taken it upon himself to ensure this happened. "The thing with the warehouse," Paulo said. It's done, she said. He nodded, went back to the stove, said nothing else. This was Paulo's version of celebration, and she had come to understand it as such. Eddie stopped her near the front desk on a Thursday morning. He was 23 and quick, and had the particular quality of someone whose natural instinct toward people was warm, and who had been briefly frightened into doubting that instinct, and was now carefully reclaiming it. "I wanted to say something," he said. "Say it," she said. "When I came back," he said. "When things were complicated, and I left, and then came back. I kept thinking about what you said. That my safety mattered more than the job, and—" He stopped. "Nobody had ever said that to me in a job. I just wanted you to know I didn't forget it." She looked at him. "It's true," she said. "It was true then, it's true now. Don't forget it." He nodded, went back to the desk. She stood in the Meridian lobby for a moment. Her hotel, its 63 people, the organized hum of a place that worked, because the people in it knew they were seen, and felt something she recognized as belonging. Not the frantic belonging of someone who has nowhere else to go, but the chosen kind. The kind that costs something and is worth the cost. She went back to her office and got on with the day. The first of Alexander's other properties was a boutique hotel in Brooklyn, smaller than the Meridian, 40 rooms, a rooftop bar that had been mismanaged for 2 years into a loss maker that should have been profitable. She walked through it on a Thursday afternoon with Diane, who was showing her the operational reports with the expression of a woman handing off something that had been stressing her since before Lillian had arrived at the Meridian. "The rooftop is the problem," Diane said. "The rooftop is a symptom," Lillian said, flipping through the staffing records. "The problem is that 3 of the supervisory roles have been empty for 8 months, and the people covering them haven't been told they're covering them. They've just been doing double work for single pay and hoping someone notices." She looked up. "Someone is about to notice." Diane looked at her with the expression she had first worn in the elevator at the Meridian 12 weeks ago. The one that was either respect or exhaustion. Possibly both. "Mr. Moretti said you would say something like that within the first 20 minutes, Diane said. "Mr. Moretti is learning," Lillian said. "He said you would say that too." She suppressed the smile and kept reading the report. Alexander met her afterward at the Thai restaurant, her choice again. He had stopped making suggestions about location, which she had noticed was not passivity, but preference. He genuinely liked that she chose, liked being taken somewhere by someone who had opinions that existed entirely independently of him. "The Brooklyn property," she said before the soup arrived. 3 immediate hires at supervisory level, full compensation review for the rooftop staff, and the events partnership contract needs to be renegotiated immediately. The current vendor is charging a service fee that doesn't appear anywhere in the original contract language. Someone signed an addendum. "I'll have legal review it," he said. "I already sent them the specific clause," she said. "Page 4, paragraph 7. It's not ambiguous." He looked at her. "I was in the building for 3 hours, she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted you in the building." The soup arrived. They ate. The restaurant was the same as it always was. Paper placemats, laminated menus, the King of Thailand on the wall, the specific smell of something that had been made with attention and care for decades. "The cooperation agreement had a development attached to it that I didn't mention earlier," he said. She looked up. "There's an asset divestment requirement," he said. "As part of the federal cooperation structure, I'm required to fully divest from 4 specific holdings within 18 months. 3 of them are the gray area operations I mentioned." He paused. "The 4th is the Port Authority stake." She set down her spoon. "The thing Caruso wanted." "Yes," he said. "The federal team wanted it separated from my holdings completely, as part of demonstrating clean distance from the investigation scope." He was watching her carefully. "I agreed." "How do you feel about it?" she said. He thought about that honestly. Like someone who has taken apart a wall and is looking at what was behind it. "What's behind it?" "More room," he said, "than I expected." She looked at him. At a man who was in the middle of dismantling something he had spent 20 years building with the specific steadiness of someone who had decided that the thing being dismantled was not the thing worth keeping. Who was building differently now and doing it carefully, and doing it with the cooperation of people he had spent his life treating as the opposition, and doing none of this perfectly, but doing all of it genuinely. "Your mother's principle," she said. He looked at her. Power that makes things easier for other people, she said. You're starting to actually do it. He was quiet for a moment. I'm trying, he said. That's all it ever is, she said. The trying, the showing up, the doing it even when it's inconvenient. She picked up her soup spoon. The rest follows. He nodded slowly, like someone receiving something they needed in a form they hadn't expected. Henry came by with water, looked at both of them, said good, which was not a response to anything that had been said aloud, and was instead a response to something he'd been tracking across weeks of Thursday evenings and Monday lunches, and the specific way that two people sat across a table from each other when the thing between them had stopped being uncertain and started being known. He went back to his kitchen. I need to tell you something, Lillian said. Alexander looked at her. The federal restitution claim, she said. I filed it. The attorney explained the process, and I filed it. She paused. I don't know yet if it will be approved or what the timeline looks like, but I filed it. His expression shifted. Something moved through it that she recognized the specific quality of being glad about something on someone else's behalf, which is a different and quieter thing than being glad for yourself. Okay, he said. I'm not telling you because it changes anything, she said. I'm telling you because I said I wouldn't tell you things that weren't true, and not telling you would have been a version of that. I know, he said. And because... She paused. My father would have hated me carrying that alone. He was very specifically opposed to people suffering unnecessarily out of pride. He considered it a waste of energy that could go somewhere useful. She looked at her soup. He was right about that. He sounds like he was right about a lot of things, Alexander said. Most things, she said. He was wrong about his own health, as I mentioned, and he thought the 2004 Yankees would go all the way, and they didn't, which caused a family crisis. But mostly, yes. Right about most things. Alexander made a sound that was not quite the laugh it was past. The laugh now was more like what the laugh became when it became part of normal life, instead of a surprise reflex, warm and brief and entirely unperformed. She looked at him across the table. What? He said. Nothing, she said. Just you look different than you did in September. He considered this. Different how? Less weight, she said. Not no weight, just less. He was quiet for a moment. It's strange, he said. I spent years adding weight to myself on purpose. I thought the weight was protection. The more there was of it, the less room there was for things that could hurt you. And now I think I had the physics wrong, he said. The weight was what was hurting me, not the things I was trying to keep out. She looked at him steadily. What changed? He met her eyes. You know what changed, he said. She did know. She had known it since a wet sidewalk in September when she had been too tired to perform fear at full capacity, and had looked at the most dangerous man in the city and seen behind everything he had built around himself something that was still waiting to be treated like a person. She had known it since a Thai restaurant with paper placemats and a laugh surprised out of someone who had forgotten he had one. Since Thursday, soups in office chairs and a hand turned over on a desk, and a text from an unsaved number that said, "Get some sleep," and meant something that had nothing to do with sleep. I know, she said. 3 months later, the Meridian's year-end numbers came in. She presented them to Alexander and Diane in the third-floor conference room, the one that had been the first room she'd used when she rearranged the event calendar in her second week, the one whose sightlines she had correctly assessed before anyone had given her the authority to assess anything. The numbers were good. Better than good. The vendor renegotiations alone had added margin that the previous coordinators had collectively lost over 4 years of accepting bad contracts. The staffing restructure had reduced turnover to its lowest rate in the hotel's 9-year history. The rooftop bar at the Brooklyn property, where she had spent 3 hours in her first visit and identified the problem as structural, not atmospheric, had turned profitable in its second month under the new supervisory team. She presented all of this in 15 minutes, because she had no interest in taking longer than necessary when the numbers spoke clearly. Diane at the end of it said simply, "Well," which from Diane was a standing ovation. Alexander said nothing during the presentation. He sat across the conference table and listened with the full tracking attention she had come to know as the specific way he heard things that mattered, and at the end of it, he said, "The second development project, the one in the Bronx, it's ready for the operations assessment phase." "I know," she said. "I've already requested the initial reports." "Of course you have," he said. Diane looked between the two of them with an expression that was entirely professional and contained approximately 7 things that were not professional at all, and excused herself with the efficiency of a woman who knew when a room needed to be smaller. The door closed. Alexander was still sitting across the conference table. She was still standing near the presentation board. The year-end numbers were behind her, concrete and clear. "The Bronx project," she said. "The operational challenges are different from the hotel properties. It's mixed-use development, retail on the ground floor, residential above a community space that the city required as part of the permit structure. The community space is the piece I want to focus on." "Why?" "Because it's the piece that the developer has been treating as an obligation instead of an opportunity," she said. "A community space run well becomes the reason the whole building works. It creates relationships with the neighborhood that protect the investment long-term. A community space run badly becomes resentment, and resentment becomes vacancy." She paused. "I want to redesign the operational plan for that space specifically." He looked at her. "Your mother's principle," she said. "This is where it actually goes. Not in theory, in practice. A community space in the Bronx run right that actually serves the people around it, that's the thing. That's what she meant." Something happened in his face. She had seen many things in his face over the months since a wet sidewalk in September. She had seen control and calculation and the careful management of an expression that had learned to do a lot of work without revealing much. She had seen the thing that came undone sometimes when something true arrived without warning. She had seen the laugh and what came after the laugh and the quiet that came after that. But this was different. This was something she hadn't seen before, and it took her a moment to identify it because it was simple enough that she had stopped expecting simple things from him. It was hope. Not strategic. Not managed. Not the calculated assessment of a man who has identified an opportunity and is deciding whether to pursue it. Just hope. Plain and undefended, the kind that appears on people's faces when they are shown a future that they had stopped believing was actually available to them. "Yes," he said. His voice was quiet. "That's what she meant." Lillian stood with that for a moment. Then she picked up the Bronx file from the table. "I'll have a preliminary operational proposal by end of the month." "I know you will," he said. She walked toward the door, stopped. "Alexander." He looked at her. "What you said in my doorway," she said. "About wanting to build something worth having." "Yes." She turned to look at him fully. At the man across the conference room who had come a very long way from the figure on a wet sidewalk that an entire street had gone silent for. Who was different now, not completed, not simplified, not absolved of what he'd been, but genuinely demonstrably working his way towards something he could stand behind. "You already have," she said. "You're in the middle of it. I just want you to know I can see it." He was very still for a moment. "Thank you," he said. And it had the same quality it had the night he'd said it outside a Thai restaurant, not a courtesy, not a managed response. Just 2 words that meant what they said. She nodded once, and she went back to work. They had dinner that night at Henry's restaurant. Not because it was Thursday, it was a Tuesday. But Henry had called the hotel at 4:30 and told Eddie, who told Lillian that he was making something special, and it would be a shame if it went to waste, and Lillian had understood this for what it was. Henry's version of an invitation to something he had been watching build across months of soup and paper placemats and a corner table where 2 people had slowly stopped being strangers. They arrived within 3 minutes of each other. Alexander was there first. He was sitting at their table with his hands on the paper placemat and his back, she noticed, not against the wall. He had chosen a different seat. She stopped just inside the door. He looked up and saw her notice. "I thought I'd try it," he said. She sat down across from him, at the table where they had first talked about what she was willing to do and what she wasn't, where he had told her about his mother's dry cleaning business and a jar of buttons sorted by an 8-year-old boy, where she had told him about her father and the way he remembered cars by what their owners chose to keep in them. Henry brought the food without anyone ordering. It was not soup. It was a full meal, the kind Henry made when he was making a point, which was occasionally and always correctly. It was the kind of meal that said, "This is worth sitting down for. This is worth eating slowly. This is the kind of evening that should be marked by something more than soup." "He's celebrating," Lillian said. "What is he celebrating?" Alexander asked. She looked at the food, at the table, at the man across from her who was sitting with his back to the door in a restaurant for the first time she had ever witnessed, because something had shifted in him deeply enough that the reflex had changed. That the body, which never lies about what the mind has decided, had simply chosen differently. "I think," she said, "he's celebrating the fact that you're here." Alexander looked at her. "Both of us," she said. "That both of us are here." He was quiet for a moment. "We're here," he said. And for a man who had spent 20 years building walls high enough that he had once forgotten there was anything on the other side of them worth building toward, those two words landed with the weight of everything they had cost and everything they had become. They ate Henry's meal slowly, the way it was meant to be eaten. They talked about the Bronx Project and Mrs. Nguyen's magnolia tree, and the way Eddie had started training on event coordination because it turned out he had a gift for logistics that the front desk wasn't using. They talked about what Alexander's mother had called the back room of the dry cleaning shop, where she kept the buttons that customers left behind, sorted into jars, because she said you could tell everything about a person's life by the buttons they lost. "I still have the jar," Lillian said. "The one I found at the flea market, on my windowsill." He was quiet for a moment, thinking about something. "I know," he said. "I saw it, the night I came to your apartment." She looked at him. "I didn't say anything because—" He paused. "Because some things don't need to be said to be understood." She held his gaze across Henry's table in the restaurant that had been there since 1973, with the paper placemats and the King of Thailand on the wall, and the specific smell of food made by someone who cared about the making of it. She thought about a wet September sidewalk, about flour on a jacket sleeve, and $43 in a checking account, and a city that never stopped moving, regardless of what you were carrying through it. About the most dangerous man in New York looking at her across 4 armed bodyguards, with something in his eyes that was not danger at all, but its opposite. The specific exposed quality of a person who has gone so long without being seen, that being looked at directly feels like weather. She thought about all of it. And she thought that her father, who had been right about most things, and wrong about the Yankees, and catastrophically wrong about his own health, would have sat in this restaurant and eaten this meal, and looked at Alexander Moretti, not at his name, not at his reputation, not at the 20 years of complicated history, but at the man sitting with his back to the door by choice, because something inside him had finally decided the door was not what needed watching anymore. And her father would have said, "There he is. That's the one." She picked up her glass. Alexander picked up his. Outside New York moved through itself the way it always had, relentless and indifferent, and full, as it had always been, of people in the middle of stories that had not yet arrived at their last line. Theirs had. Not the last line of everything that would keep going, would have its complications, and its Tuesday dinners, and its difficult conversations, and its buildings that needed better vendor contracts, and its community spaces in the Bronx that needed someone to understand that an obligation could be an opportunity if you cared about the people it was supposed to serve. But the last line of the part that had been about whether this was possible. That part was done, because a woman who had been too exhausted to perform fear had bumped into a man who had been too armored to feel hope on a sidewalk in the rain, and neither of them had looked away, and that, it turned out, had been enough to change everything. The glasses touched. Henry from across the room did not look up. He was smiling.